supposed to know that stuff, right?
The meeting will come to order. We are now holding our regularly scheduled meeting held June 23rd, 2009, 9 a.m. And at this time, I'd like to call on Rabbi Michael Bernholtz from Temple Beth Shalom to give the invocation, and the Pledge of Allegiance will be followed by Commissioner Peter O'Brien. Welcome. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you. I stand before you keenly aware that this County Commission chamber is a place of speaking, and yet I stand before you to talk about listening. Right now in our cycle of reading in the Jewish community, we are in the book of Numbers, which in Hebrew is Bamidbar, which literally means wilderness. But if you look at the Hebrew, it has another word that's implanted in that, which is daber, which means to speak. That one of the things we talk about the wilderness is where the people of Israel not only spoke to God, but heard God, were in dialogue with God. In fact, it says, when we feel that we're lost in a wilderness, we can remember that Moses in the wilderness heard the voice of the Eternal, and perhaps we can too. And it's very important value in Jewish life, but I think in life in general, for us not only to be thinking about what we are going to say and how we're going to say it, but actually to stop ourselves, to give ourselves a chance to listen and to hear. And in fact, the prayer I offer this morning is about listening and seeing God and sensing God in our world. But if we only think about it as thinking about hearing God or listening to God or seeing God, then we're missing something really important. There is a wrinkle that I add to this, and that is that in Judaism, and many religions in fact, we talk about seeing God, seeing divinity in each and every person. There's in fact a very interesting, incredible midrash, Jewish story, about taking the name of God, spelled Yud He Vav He, and about its numeric value, and then looking at the Hebrew letter Aleph, that the two are equivalent, and that seeing that the way that the human face is shaped is actually a way that we can say that the name of God is inscribed on each and every person's face. It is a reminder that within each of us, we are all touched with divinity. We're all part of that divinity. And so when we listen and speak to each other, we are in truth listening and speaking to God. So as I offer this prayer this morning, as the County Commission is prepared to speak, as the people from our community that are here prepared to speak, I ask you to take time also not just to listen to each other, but to listen with that sense of connecting with something greater than yourselves, something that's part of our community and beyond. I offer this blessing for listening, for hearing, and for connecting. God, I give thanks for the days to come and for your strength within me that will bring me through the difficulties and dangers. I thank you for the joys that will lighten my days. And if in the swift passing days I fail to hear your voice, in your voice or in the voice of others, and if the blinding glare I do not recognize your presence, O God, in the presence of others, please forgive me. Help me then to strengthen the goodness within me. Help me to see clearly what is truly worthwhile and to keep to it more faithfully. Then when this day and this week have passed, they will mark another step on our way through life, a step taken in the awareness that you, O God, that you, this human community, that the sense of shalom, of wholeness, completeness, and peace goes with me. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we have some additions or deletions and some emergency items. Commissioners, on consent item 8H, page 84 in your backup, the contract amount says $839,328. It should be $839,935. So that's just a
$7.
Yes. I just would like to make that change. And if you have any questions, please feel free to pull it. But was brought to my attention. The second is we have a public discussion matter and an attorney's matter that are very similar. And what I would like to do is to move the attorney's matter up to, on that issue, up to the public discussion matter.
So move.
Okay, any other modifications to the agenda? Got a motion from Commissioner Wheeler and a second from Commissioner Flesher. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, now that'll move us to proclamations and presentations. And at this time, we have a proclamation honoring Sebastian Police Chief Jim Davis on his retirement, effective June 24th. That's tomorrow, 2009. Chief, come on up. Commissioner Wheeler will be reading this proclamation.
Morning, Chief.
Good morning.
I'd like to also recognize the new chief, Chief Davis. I'm sorry, Chief Morris. Hard to get rid of Davis, you know. And also Officer Lockhart and Officer Witt and Mrs. Davis, the other half of Chief Davis.
Better
and
half.
Also your city manager, Mr. Minner. I think it speaks highly that they're here to honor you, as they're going to honor you on Thursday. And I can tell you that before I read the proclamation, that Jim Davis is one of the finest people I've ever known in my life, and I think Michelle is going to do a wonderful job. But you're really losing a superb individual, not just an administrator. But with that, I'd like to say that this proclamation is honoring Sebastian Police Chief Jim Davis on his retirement, effective June 24, 2009. Whereas Chief Davis moved to Indian River County in 1990 from Beverly Hills, Michigan, retiring after nearly 31 years of service. And whereas his background included working as a rookie officer, advancing to the head of the Beverly Hills Public Safety Department. And whereas Chief Davis was hired 3 days after his retirement to work for Indian River Shores, as they were converting from a traditional fire police department into a single public safety department, in which officers perform police, fire, and emergency medical duties. And whereas in 1993, Chief Davis moved to the county to work under the then Sheriff Gary Wheeler as the head of Uniform Division, and was later promoted to Undersheriff, where he helped to set up the community policing program. Under the program, substations were established in places like Gifford and Vero Beach Highlands. And whereas in 2001, he was selected by the new Sheriff, Roy Raymond, to fill Sebastian's needs as an interim police chief. That summer, he was permanently placed in the position where over the past 8 years, he has overseen the creation of the Marine, Motorcycle, K-9 units, a special response team, and implementation of the Sebastian 911 system. And whereas the accomplishments and the successes of the organizations Chief Davis has served are a direct result of his dedication, in addition to his innumerable benevolent contributions to the office and to the community. Now, therefore, it be proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the Board extends to Chief Jim Davis thanks for a job well done and a heartfelt wishes for a happy and prosperous retirement, adopted this 23rd day, 2009, and signed by all the county commissioners. Would you like to keep it to a half an hour? You want to give us a
I'd like to say thank you very much. It's my third or fourth time leading a department. It's going to be the last time. My wife has a lot to say about that. But I think probably at 71, it's probably time to do something else. Thinking about being an airline pilot or something before I get too old. But seriously, it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed every day of my career. I'm going to miss the people I work with, and I'm still going to be here to bother y'all. We like Vero Beach. We're going to stay right here. So you'll see us around town, and we could turn out to be your worst nightmare. Who knows? I would like to thank all of the commissioners that helped us pass our 911 PSAP. That was a great thing for Sebastian, and one of our biggest accomplishments, and it's working very well. Thank you for recognizing me, and I'm done.
Thank you. Congratulations, Chief.
Next, we have proclamations and presentations B, which is the presentation of Youth Guidance Mentoring and Activities Program by Barbara Schlitt Ford, Executive Director. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for allowing me to come today. I just wanted to thank the Commission and the citizens of Indian River County in general for their support of our program, and I wanted to make sure that people know what we do. The Youth Guidance Mentoring and Activities Program serves the at-risk youth of this community, kindergarten through 12th grade. We serve approximately 700 kids annually in this county, and one of our primary goal is to match them each with a mentor. And we are always in need of those. We have hundreds of children on the waiting list still waiting for mentors. And if there's anyone in the community that is interested in that, I would urge them to contact me at Youth Guidance. But today I just wanted to give you a report on one of the programs that we have going on right now, which is our summer camp scholarship program. Through fundraising dollars and grants and donations from businesses and citizens in the community, we've been able to raise nearly $50,000 to send the kids in our program to a wide variety of local summer camps. Pretty much they have a budget of $300 to spread across the course of a summer to attend local camps, so that they are not left at home unattended over the course of the summer, because these children come from single-parent homes where the parent is working 1 or 2 full-time jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. And we want these kids to have every opportunity to develop to their full potential that their more advantaged peers do. We are still slightly short of our goal, and if anybody wanted to contribute and sponsor a child for summer camp, they can do so by going to our website at ircyouth.com. And they can do that right online or to our P.O. Box. They could send a check, P.O. Box 121, Vero Beach 32961. In addition to the mentoring and the summer camps, we also offer homework help, tutoring, about 50 recreational, educational, and cultural programs for the kids year-round, college scholarships for the kids going on to higher education, and music lessons, sports lessons. So I would urge any single-parent families that want to get their kids enrolled with us to also give us a call, because we will be taking children again the 1st of August without a waiting list. So, and I just also wanted to make sure that the Commission and the community in general were aware of another organization called the Connected for Kids Coalition of Indian River County, and it was formed about 2 years ago. It's all of the groups that work with children in the county working together to make sure that we're most efficiently meeting the needs of the kids in this county. So schools, all the nonprofits, churches, and so anybody that's not aware of that, I would also urge them to contact me to get involved with that, because it's a really great coalition. We're doing a lot of great things, producing a directory of services, parenting forums. We have a website, connected4kids.org, and they can contact me for that as well. And I just wanted to, again, thank the Commission and the citizens of this county for being farsighted in its support of the programs for the youth that live here, because they are the future of this county. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. You've given us a mailing address and websites. Is there a phone number that you'd like to give out also?
770-5040.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Ford.
Thanks.
Keep up the good work. Thank you. Next, we have the presentation and status of storm preparedness in the Upper St. Johns River by Maurice Sterling, Director of Project Management in St. Johns River Water Management District. Maurice, welcome.
Good morning. I'm actually Jeff Cole.
I didn't think you look like Maurice.
Maurice is here, and Maurice will be talking, but
there you are.
Maurice is
Okay.
right there.
Okay.
I'm Jeff Cole. I'm the Director of Communications and Governmental Affairs for the Water Management District. Have with me Maurice, who've already introduced. Also, Ann Benedetti. Ann is our liaison for all of you, a good resource for you. She's located at our Palm Bay Service Center. She's fairly new to the district, but she's available should you need any assistance from the agency.
Is that Margarita's replacement?
She replaced
Okay.
Margarita Engle. Yes,
Right.
correct. Yep.
All right, super.
We're here today as part of a commitment we made last fall to keep the elected officials in the region better informed about our regional restoration and regional flood control projects. As you know, We don't have any structural control over localized drainage issues and canals, but we do have a massive restoration project in the western part of your county that was tested last fall with Tropical Storm Faye, and has been extremely successful. So that's what Maurice is here to talk to you about, and we'll be available to answer any questions.
Super.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having us this morning. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to have to ask for help driving your high-tech system here. And as soon as it's up, we'll proceed ahead. This is a brief to you and to your citizens about the preparedness effort in the headwaters of the St. Johns, which of course are located in western Indian River County, the place where the St. Johns rises and begins its 310-mile journey to Bayport at Jacksonville. The presentation is called Storm Status Storm. Okay, yeah, that's it. All right. Okay. All right, here we go. And it's been my professional privilege for 20 years to lead the Upper St. Johns project as the principal manager from its inception, really, back in the late 1970s through the groundbreaking in 1988 and all the way through the construction activities of the last several years. Okay. Right. These sunrise presentations remind me of Mark Twain when he said, if you have to eat a little green frog, it's better to do it first thing in the morning so you don't have to look at it all day long. And I'd like to thank you for your courtesy to allow us to go first right out of the box and get this behind you and your daily business and me back on the road toward Palatka. The aims of the presentation this morning are very simple. One is to brief you on the status of storm preparedness in the western part of your county, where we have flood damage protection and prevention works and flood control structures to operate. It's to review the scope, status, and performance of the Upper St. Johns project, that massive public investment that Jeff Cole mentioned to you a moment ago, and how that's performing in the headwaters of the river. I'll refer to that project, which has a long name, as the Upper Basin Project. And also, as Jeff mentioned, our points of contact relative to our emergency operations. So whether you have an issue with the Upper Basin Project, your constituents there in the western part of the county, or whether you have flood issues locally to your other areas of the county, you'll have a point of contact with the Water District to steam you on your way. Who could forget a few years ago in 2004 that Vero was in the crosshairs of Hurricane Alley with the major 4 storms that struck Florida, 2 that hit Vero Beach that year, Charlie crisscrossing the state, and a unprecedented level of storm activity. And so I believe that 2000 season certainly sensitized folks to the enormous power and risk of storms and hurricanes. And indeed, we saw extensive flooding as a result of those storms. This is a map that just shows the rain totals from the 60-day period of the hurricanes in 2004. That's August and September. And you can see the red areas show a 200-year return frequency. A lot of rain around the DeBerry, Central Florida area, a lot of rain over Gainesville. And in your neck of the woods, if we can go one more slide, and I've exploded that. That's Indian River County at the south end of the Water District. That's a greater than 200-year rainfall at the southeast corner of your county. And the Upper Basin area, that bold line through the middle of your county going north to south, is the basin boundary. Everything rain that falls east of that line flows east to the lagoon. Everything that falls west of that line, of course, flows to the Upper St. Johns. And so you see those totals. Here's a few years later, last year in fact, about 9 months ago, we saw another unprecedented storm, Tropical Storm Faye, which of course you'll remember struck. It made 4 major landfalls in Florida, simply would not go away, dumped extraordinary rain in Merritt Island in North Brevard County, and also a lot of rain in Indian River. That was a storm that it had pockets of over 25 inches of rain, a lot of rain over the river basin itself. You can see that swath of red and orange all the way from Indian River County north all the way to Sanford in the middle of St. John's Basin. Just when we thought that we'd never see another Fay again, just last month we saw a record rainfall where Bunnell, Florida became the epicenter, go ahead, one more, the epicenter of the weather world again. And we saw another 25-inch rainfall in 5 days over northern Volusia and Flagler counties. So you were spared, of course, that event somewhat. You got some rain from it. This is a 5 or 6 day total rainfall. And here's the return frequency of that storm. Of course, again, your county was spared, but the big red area there shows another rain event right after Fay. That's an excess of a 100-year return frequency. So all that blended together certainly reminds us that we could be subject to a storm any day, whether it's an unnamed storm in May or whether it's a tropical event in hurricane season, which we're in today. The Upper Basin region of the district, this is the drainage watershed that serves the Upper St. John's area, about a 2,000 square mile basin, again starts in western Indian River County. The big lake there in the middle at the south is Blue Cypress Lake, and that's the first lake in the headwater chain of sinkhole lakes that connect the river, the marsh and the river, all the way from here to Jacksonville. Okay. This is a map of the footprint of the Upper Basin project. The area shown here in the pink is the project area. It's about 237 square miles in size, and the boundaries of this project are well defined by massive Corps of Engineer levees that along the eastern side of the basin that create a flood wall so that floodwaters can be managed safely within the confines of the basin project area. Let me say briefly what the project doesn't do and then what the project does do. One, it doesn't provide a solution for every flooding problem in the area. It can only serve the properties that the project is designed to protect. It does not accommodate floods outside those design parameters. In other words, it can't prevent street flooding in Vero Beach. It can't solve a localized problem in Wabasso, but it can and does protect vast quantities and areas of citrus groves in Indian River County and agricultural lands in Brevard County, as well as certain parts of southern Palm Bay. When I started with the district, the nearest house to the project levees was probably 10 or 15 miles. Over my career, those homes have marched inexorably west and now butt up against the Corps of Engineer dikes. So this project does protect humans and homes and lives, where initially it was only conceived to protect citrus groves and cattle farms. Okay. What it does do is vastly improve flood protection to those lands upstream of US 192 within the Upper Basin area. The level of design protection is about a 250-year event storm. That's the storm that could statistically be expected to occur once every 250 years. In Corps of Engineer parlance, that's a standard project flood, which is the maximum level of protection that the Corps of Engineers designs a project to protect to. Just for a frame of reference, most private agricultural dikes in your county were designed to protect for about a 10 to 20-year storm event. So it's a risk management question. How much do I invest in my dikes and levees to protect my groves or my crops? Most of those old ag dikes were designed for about a 10-year storm, to protect against a 10-year storm. This project is designed to provide 250-year level of protection. It does restore a lot of river floodplain and functions. It does reduce, and this is important, it reduces freshwater discharges to the Indian River Lagoon, and it does enhance public recreation and use throughout the area. Become very popular as a fishing location, as many of you know. Okay. All right, let's move ahead. The project is designed with massive marsh areas that absorb. If you could conceive of this like a great sponge to absorb flood waters during the rainy season and store and hold those waters, conserving those waters to be released slowly during the dry season of the year. Florida receives about 70% of its rainfall or more, sometimes 80% during the 6 wet months of the year, June through September, and then of course October to May are usually typically dry months, except for last month. Okay? And another major feature of the project are large offline retention reservoirs. If you could conceive of these as the retention pond on the corner of your convenience mart or the Walmart store having a stormwater pond, these are in similar concept, simply multiplied by many thousands of acres to capture and segregate poor quality agricultural runoff, which is loaded with nutrients typically from the marshes adjacent to those agricultural water receiving and water use areas. And again, it primarily in western Indian River County, the project protects Indian River citrus, what we know as Indian River citrus and what the world knows as the Indian River citrus label. One point I would like to make, just to clarify how the project is operated, we have a regulation schedule for water levels that is prescribed by the Army Corps, worked with our staff, of course, and we typically manage the water levels as long as there's adequate water to manage according to these schedules. This is the regulation schedule on the bottom for the Blue Cypress Marsh, that's Blue Cypress Lake, and the dashed line on the top is for the Blue Cypress Water Management Area. Local citizens would probably recognize that and typically call that the Garcia Fishing Area. It's the area bisected by State Road 512. And so we hold the water levels in the dry season a little higher, drawing those levels down to create additional storage in the wet season, and then allowing with anticipated rainfall for the water levels in those pools to rise back up to regulation levels in the wet season again, or dry season again. And so we create storage in the basin in anticipation of tropical activity and tropical rains by manipulating the water levels slightly in those areas. And because of the vastness of these areas, tens of thousands of acres in size, a reduction of just a foot or foot and a half in level creates an enormous storage capability within these management pools. And I want to just underscore the fact that the project was designed to not be dependent on what we refer to as preemptive discharges. We don't have to anticipate that it might rain and then dump water in panic only to find out that maybe it didn't rain as much or the storm moved faster than it. You know, a storm can pick up speed, a rain band can miss a basin and move along. As you well know, the variation in Florida rain is extraordinary. It can rain a lot on the beach, not any in the river. And so the project was designed to wait, to be able to manage, to be able to, excuse me, my phone's buzzing, I got distracted. The project is designed to accommodate the rains that come and allow us to respond to that by creating that adequate storage within those basin areas. One addition that's been an improvement that is we no longer have to send staff out to manipulate floodgates. We have remote sensing capabilities in the basin now. Those remote operations can be handled through a laptop computer from Palatka or anywhere. Their satellite receivers can beam the orders to open the gates or close the gates or adjust floodgates at the touch of a button, and that system has allowed us to respond much quicker to changes in water levels within the project. One major improvement that has occurred last year, late last year, early this year, that's been needed, that does directly affect our ability to provide adequate levels of flood management service to your county, is improvements downstream of the major outlet structures to Blue Cypress Lake which is S96C, located on the right side of your graph, and S96B over on the left side. You're looking due east. The canal up at the S96A structure that leads off into the horizon is the C54 canal at the north end of your county, the county boundary between Indian River and Brevard County. The wide open sheet of water there at the northeast corner of your picture is the Stick Marsh Complex in just west of Fellsmere Farms. And S96C is the major outlet structure to Blue Cypress Lake. S96B is the outlet structure to the Stick Marsh Complex. When the project was constructed in the late 80s, early 90s, these were the first two flood control structures created. And they were located so close together that it created, when both structures were operated at the same time, it created a high tailwater condition downstream of both structures and reduced the ability to operate both structures efficiently. So we had to close one structure to operate the other, and it was a balancing act. So by the magic of computer graphics, let me show you what the Corps of Engineers has come back in and just completed. They've actually segregated both of those structures with a tieback levee between the two, constructing a new getaway channel downstream of C, and now both structures can be operated completely independently, and we can maximize discharge out of both facilities with no problem at all. And so that's been a very needed and long-awaited improvement that now is in place and gives us even more added flexibility. One other piece, and I'm almost done, one other piece of the puzzle that we have put into place recently that I'm sure you've heard about is the acquisition of 10,000 acres of what's known as Fellsmere Farms, managed by Sun Ag, or just east of the St. John's Water Management Area or Stick Marsh Complex. And 4,000 of those acres are now shallow flooded. That gives us added water storage capability. And once that project is fully online, or scheduled now for about 2013 or 2014, will give us tremendous ability to manage water more effectively in the western part of the county. And one message I would like to leave with you today is that regardless of the other benefits, other anticipated purposes of the project, which are many, we will operate C54 Canal if we need to operate it. It will open the structure if there's a flood, just like we did after Hurricane or Tropical Storm Faye, and just like we have in the past. Do we like to operate it and make massive releases? No, because it creates deleterious impacts to the lagoon. Obviously, it's a last resort, but it is there for that purpose, and if and when there is a significant flood event, the structure is there as almost a pop-off valve. It is the structure that can almost guarantee flood protection for the areas upstream. So we will use it if we need to use it, and I don't want you to feel that we're allergic to using that structure if we need to open it. Okay. All right. So my parting message is that flood damage prevention is the primary purpose of this project. It always has been, continues to be so. The project is virtually complete in Indian River County except for the newest addition, which is the Fellsmere Farms addition, which is under construction now. And it has met, fortunately, with Faye and other storms, Tropical Storm Gordon in 1994. We've gotten some field tests of the project, and it's working very well. And as far as we stand today, we're in very good shape going into the 2009 tropical season. And so with that, I would just say with forward actions, we want to improve our pre-event coordination with staff and keep that channel of communication open. We pledge to you good post-storm cooperation in whatever assistance you need. We will be there for you. Give us a call. We'll be happy to help in any way we can with your water management practices. And also, we want to continue to assess the operational capabilities and with a view toward doing better always in the future. And two sources of information that may be of interest to you or your citizens. You can track our activities and the status of storms with announcements online at our website. And there's also a interesting white paper on flooding, understanding flooding in the upper basin, how the structural system works there. Very good primer on it, if you'd care to read it. And with that, I do thank you for your allowing us to speak this morning and present. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you.
Thank you, Maurice. And yes, I do, as a matter of fact. And there's 3 different areas. One of them, of course, is I had the opportunity to attend the workshop that you had here at the County Administration Building B. I believe it was on the 18th, about some of the projects for the Fort Drum Conservation or Wildlife Management Area, and from Bull Creek. And it was a very good presentation, and I appreciate y'all hosting that or having that here for the residents of Indian River County. At the very end of that meeting, Doug Bernique had mentioned that you plan on having the engineering study, I'm going to call it that, for the basin reconnect of the South Florida and St. John's ready by September, in September. He didn't say September 1st. I do have a request, if you would, upon the completion of that study or the release of that study, if we could have another presentation about that specifically. And basically, that's exciting because what you tried to do, or what you're doing at C-54, is going to be duplicated to the south of us, and of course that whole lagoon is what's truly affected by that. So that's the first thing. The second one is, and I don't want to contradict myself, but if on page 21, where you talked a little bit about the, or on slide 21, where you mentioned where the water is now being segregated so that you don't have the backflow pressure. The dilemma, and I know we spoke about this before, but the dilemma, of course, there is that water that's coming into the St. Johns River at the Brevard Indian River County line is originating down south of State Road 60, and none of that is flowing into the Blue Cypress Lake at all. And of course, that drainage basin being taken away, as you know, does affect and concern many of the residents and business owners out at the Blue Cypress Lake. So with that being said, there's 2 things that I would like to, and we've talked a little bit about it, but to reiterate that. One is to see about raising the level of the lake, or raising those benchmarks that you showed us on slide 19 by a foot. And that kind of poses a double problem because we saw it during Tropical Storm Faye, inches from the people's door out there. So obviously we're asking for more water and then complaining about how much water, and that's just the nature of the beast with flood control. But having the ability to increase the level of the lake by 1 foot, and then doing some modifications on the structures to the north side of Blue Cypress on the, I'm going to call it the Kenansville grade. Those water structures to the east, or to the west of M Canal, need to be lowered because, and I don't know where we are in that project, but we realize that those are so high enough to the point that we cannot discharge in the event of a major flood event fast enough into the northern boundaries of the, or into the northern basin. So there's just 3 things. One, to reiterate, was whenever they get the study, if you could, or somebody could come down and give us the grand scheme of the reconnect. One is to increase the benchmarks by a foot, if we could, in Blue Cypress Lake basin, and then of course to be able to discharge that water through the Kenansville grade. Okay, thank you. Commissioners, anything else? Commissioner Solari?
I have one question on the C-54 canal. I don't know if you know the answer, but prior to the Fellsmere Farms addition, roughly how many times a year did you dump through the C-54? And after its completion, how many times do you anticipate you'll need to dump through the C-54?
It's a good question, Commissioner. I don't have the numbers on the number of times, but I do have the answer in terms of quantity and frequency of operation. Prior to Fellsmere Farms acquisition, we had reduced discharge from the pre-project condition, which was the shape of the basin when we inherited it in the 1977, by 78% in both frequency and quantity. That was a 78% reduction in flows from C-54 with the construction. That's a consequence of the construction of the Upper Basin project. After Fellsmere Farms comes online, our computer models are telling us we will reduce that discharge to 0. We will no longer discharge from C-54.
So basically you're saying you're only going to discharge after C-54 for maybe a 100-year storm event or something like that?
After Fellsmere Farms is online, we won't use it again. We should not have to use it again.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate y'all coming down. Have a safe trip. Next, we have the presentation of the hurricane preparedness by John King, Director of Indian River County Emergency Services. Welcome, Mr. King. I don't think your mic's on there, John.
I thought that was on. Good morning, Commissioners, and for the record, my name is John King. I'm the Emergency Services Director for Indian River County, and thank you for asking me to be here this morning, and I think this is quite a nice dovetail to what the St. John's just presented. Kind of give you a snapshot of where we are with our local planning and getting ready for hurricane season. And as the Commission recalls, hurricane season is from June 1st through the last day of November, and during this time of year we have heating like we had yesterday. My gosh, was it hot yesterday. That creates evaporation, creates some of these severe weather events that happen. And for that reason, I'm here today to talk to you about what we're doing locally with hurricane season. And I know it looks like a lot, but I'll get through this relatively quickly. Some of the activities we're doing locally, some of the family disaster planning, business disaster planning, and some of the resources that are available locally to help somebody get ready for hurricane season. Indian River County received a designation from the National Weather Service as a storm-ready community. And that's not a typo there. It's compressed to storm-ready. And what exactly does that mean? What that means is that nearly 90% of all presidentially declared disasters are as a result of some severe weather event. And so there's been a major effort to have communities become better prepared, have advanced planning, education for the community, and have a process that we share information with a community like the county back to our local weather field office of the National Weather Service to help us get information back out to the community. In fact, we encourage everybody in the community to have a NOAA weather radio, and if you don't have one, you can go to the county's website and you can get the audio from there, so I'll share more of that in a few minutes. The other thing that we do is we have a comprehensive emergency management plan. Each of the commissioners have one of those in their office. It looks like that very thick document right behind me here. And the document by the Florida Administrative Code has to be updated and reviewed to a compliance crosswalk by the Florida Division of Emergency Management every 5 years. We go through ours from front page to back page every 6 months. So it's constantly being reviewed. And for anybody in the community that would like to take a look at this plan and not have to come in and ask for us to copy one, you can go to the county's webpage, and it's right on there. And there's things in there about shelters. There's information there about reentry after a storm. There's information in there about the county's ability to declare a local emergency to make things happen in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the community. Another thing under statewide hurricane exercise, the governor announced this past year that Florida was going to take a little bit different approach to these major disasters and planning for these major severe weather events than what may have happened in some other states. As you may remember, when Hurricane Katrina moved in, many people were put on buses and taken to different states. The state of Florida has decided that we're going to try to our best to not relocate a mass number of people and try to take care of Florida residents within the state of Florida. And so this is really a big undertaking when you think about a storm coming into a Miami or a Tampa or a Jacksonville area and people not being able to stay in their homes and having to be relocated. There was a 5-day exercise that occurred. And on one afternoon of that 5-day exercise, all of the, we call them emergency support functions, but essentially it's the county and the municipal agencies that support the Emergency Operations Center. They all came in. We were able to share our plans, our updates, raise any concerns, things that have changed from last year. And so I feel very comfortable with the agencies that are working in the Emergency Operations Center. We know what our assignments are this year, so we can better respond to the needs of the community. Next on the list is our debris management program. For most hurricanes that are a large Category 1 or larger, as much as 70% of the local costs come from debris removal. You would think it'd be other things. It'd be housing. It would be having people on the streets directing traffic or running ambulances. But it actually has a lot to do with debris. And so I was fortunate enough, I have a good friend that works in Tallahassee. Our office has a good friend, Phil Worley, and he is kind of the state's guru on disaster reimbursement. And so he actually came to our county for a day and a half. We brought in those county agencies that are responsible for debris removal. Public Works is a big part of that, and so is solid waste. We spent about a day and a half working on the things that we know are going to be a concern for us. It's the contracts with debris contractors that when the debris exceeds our local capabilities, it's the ability to have sites there are approved sites to just temporarily store this stuff until we can dispose of it. And then some of the environmental concerns that after the site's removed to make sure that DEP is satisfied with the way we left the ground as compared to the way we found the ground. And so part of what I'm telling you is a strong emergency management program isn't just 3 or 4 people in a room with the doors closed. It has a lot to do with having community cooperation from not just the counties, but from also the cities and the private nonprofits who work in this community. And a good example of that is we also have a special needs committee that this council is very familiar with. We have persons who do not require constant hospital stay, but they require electricity at their house, or they require a visiting nurse to come see them almost every day to maintain their quality of life. And if we're going to lose power in this community, we have a special needs shelter that these people relocate to try to help them through that interim period until the community can get back on its feet. And it's not just the county that's out there. You have the county health department, you have the Senior Resources Association, you have the Indian River Medical Center, you have a number of the Red Cross, the number of agencies that participate and work with that program. We're also constantly trying to improve our public notification information. Many of you have seen on Channel 27, the county's channel, that we've been running little PowerPoint slides on there. And Adam with Computer Services has been helpful with that. In fact, yesterday he was running information about the high heat for yesterday, just so people would know what's out there. But not everybody has cable vision. And so we've been working very closely with the Christian radio station, 91.9, who has been on contract with the county for many years, and they help us with public information, and we're trying to, again, improve those services for this coming year. And so, again, another good partner in the community that's really trying to help. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm trying to compress a lot of information because I could speak for 2 days about this, and I'm trying to give you a 5-minute snapshot. This NIMS compliance, it's a required little training activity that we have to do. It lasts a couple of days, but the meat of this is if we expect to get any federal mitigation dollars after a local declaration, after a presidentially declared disaster, we have to have certain people on staff who have had the training to be able to get these dollars to help prevent repetitive damage. That's done for this year. The state, under the regional evacuation study in SLOSH, the state has appropriated $28 million this year to go around the state of Florida and try to determine those properties adjacent to the coastal lands that are going to be flooded if we have a sea, lake, or compress this. If you have a severe high tide from a storm, it's going to impact the community. Many people think that the Bear Island's over there, and the Bear Island's going to be the protect all. But anybody that was here in 2004, all of our models showed that we were going to have flooding on both sides of the intercoastal waterway. And that, in fact, has happened. The nice things that are coming out of this regional evacuation study is counties are working more closely together because we know only so many people can evacuate on 95 or State Road 60 if we have an emergency. So what Martin, St. Lucie, and Brevard is doing also impacts our evacuations. In addition to that, the elevations that were in the old models were based on some very old maps, and now we're going to have very new maps that have a much better elevation parameters into the models. So it may mean that some people who thought they didn't have to evacuate will have to evacuate, and some that thought they were on the other side of that also have to know what their areas are. Pet-friendly shelters. As we sit here today, we do not have a pet-friendly shelter. However, staff is working with the Humane Society, working with the Red Cross, working with the school board, and we hope that sometime during this year that we will be in the final throes of pulling that together. Why is that important? Nearly 40% of the people in this community, 40% of the homes, have at least one pet. And so hopefully people have made some plans for their pets, but some people just have no other option than to go to some public facility. And this is not a drop-off for your pets. It's going to be a shelter where people are in and their pets are in with them. So we're not taking over a pet daycare center. We're trying to help people who have a need. So I encourage you, the county webpage, I'll go to that in a few minutes, but there's a lot of information on the county's webpage. A lot of departments have worked collectively. I've worked with the solid waste disposal district on some tree trimming recently. Adam's been getting information up there, and there's a lot of information to the general public about how to get ready. And quickly, family disaster plan. We tell people that they need to have their plans ahead of time. Don't wait. If you wait till you get a hurricane watch or hurricane warning to identify that you need a plan, you've waited too long. So there's, on our website, you can go there and get information about how to protect your most important assets, your kids, your pets, your insurance papers. The slogan this year is run from the water, hide from the wind. 9 out of 10 people who die in hurricanes die by drowning. And so that's why we try to evacuate people away from those coastal areas. And a surprising study, the state spent some money, hired an independent firm to come in and do some telephone surveys about what are you doing for your family to get ready for hurricane season. Surprising fact, nearly 50% of the people don't even know where the closest shelter is to their house. And so if you go to our webpage, the county's webpage, you'll find out where your closest shelter is. We have a number of people in this community who have businesses. And with the businesses, we tell them, prepare for your business just like you do for your family. And another important fact is that nearly 40% of small businesses who are closed for a month due to a storm event do not reopen as that same small business. We have a lot of small businesses in this community. So it's important, if you have a small business, you need to know if your location's in a storm zone area. You also need to know, have a list of your suppliers that you can depend on, how to get in contact with them if you have to relocate. And it's important that you have your vital records. We find that many small businesses have a proprietary software that all their records are on, all their clients are on. And if you take your records and you don't have a place to another computer to run those vital records on, you're almost out of business. And so with that, trying to pull this to a closing, the county webpage, ircgov.com. There's a great deal of information. The county administrator has been very supportive of letting us have a little small section of the front page that you can quickly go to and get information. If anybody has any questions, you can call the Department of Emergency Services either through that page or just go to the yellow pages and we're in there. And on the Florida Division of Emergency Management webpage, floridadisaster.org, there's very good information on there if you have a business and you want to put together a business plan. It'll actually walk you through how to do a business plan for your business. Do you have any questions this morning?
Commissioners? Thank you very much,
Thank you
John.
so
Certainly
much.
do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, Commissioners, let's move on to the approval of the minutes for the meeting held June 2nd, 2009.
Move approval.
Motion from Commissioner Fleshner, second by Commissioner O'Brien. If there's no discussion, we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion passes unanimously. Next, that moves us to the informational items and then to the consent agenda. Commissioners, what's your pleasure on the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Got a motion to approve from Commissioner Wheeler with a second from Commissioner Fleshner. No discussion, we'll vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion passes unanimously. Now we have the constitutional officers and governmental agencies. I understand the sheriff's not here, but he left it in capable hands. Welcome.
Yes, you do. Kim Poole, planner from the Indiana County Sheriff's Office. I'm here to answer any questions that you all have reference to the bulletproof vest grant.
Move approval.
Got a motion from Commissioner Solari and a second from Commissioner Flesher. No discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, public hearings. This is a public hearing for William Gregory Constructions, Inc., a request to amend the future land use map to redesignate plus or minus .32 acres located at the northwest corner of Indian River Boulevard and 37th Street from M1 medium density residential 1 up to 8 units per acre to CI commercial industrial district, and to rezone that plus or minus .32 acres from RM8 residential multiple family residential 1 up to 8 units per acre to OCR, which is office commercial residential district. Commissioners, that's in page 132 through 166 in your backup. Mr. Keating, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Bob Keating. I'm County Community Development Director. This is a small-scale land use amendment and a rezoning, and it's for a very small parcel. The parcel is actually less than 1/3 of an acre in size, and the proposal is to change the land use designation from M1, which is medium density residential 1, to commercial industrial, and to rezone the property from RM8, which is residential multifamily up to 8 units per acre, to office commercial residential. You've seen small-scale amendments in the past. These are exempt from the twice-a-year limit requirement for standard amendments, and they also have a streamlined review. Small-scale amendments don't have to go to DCA to be reviewed by the state. And one of the reasons for that is small-scale amendments have fewer impacts than regular amendments. And there are some criteria that have to be met for a land use change to be small-scale. One is the property has to be 10 acres or less, and another is that the property can't be environmentally sensitive or have environmental characteristics. For the proposed comp plan amendment and rezoning, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted unanimously to recommend that you approve it. This slide shows the subject property in green. It is just north of 37th Street, and it's west of Indian River Boulevard. To the west of the subject property is the Oak Point commercial subdivision, and to the southwest is the 777 building. This is a parcel that the county wishes was never created, and it was partially created by the county. This parcel was severed from the parent parcel when the county acquired right-of-way for Indian River Boulevard Phase 3 back in the late 80s. Actually, this slide shows a little better the parent parcel. Before the acquisition of the right-of-way and the creation of the remainder property, the parcel was about 20 acres in size. Back in the late 80s, the county had to go to condemnation to acquire the right-of-way for this part of Indian River Boulevard. And through that process, the county could not prove necessity to acquire the remainder property, this less than 1/3 of an acre parcel. So it was created at that time, and it obviously still exists. You can see from this slide that all the property to the west and the south has a commercial industrial land use designation on the comp plan, and all the property to the north and east has the same M1 designation as the subject property. It is similarly with the zoning pattern out there. The Oak Point project is zoned office commercial residential. Most of the rest of the property to the west and the south is zoned medical district, and the property that's designated M1 in the comp plan is zoned RM8. This is going to be a difficult property to develop any way you look at it. You can see the dimensions of the lot itself. These are the dimensions of the footprint after you provide for the setbacks that are required. It's only 2,800 square feet of a building envelope, and to make matters worse, there's a 35-foot drainage easement on the south side. To develop the property in that 2,800 square foot envelope, the applicant's going to have to accommodate parking. He's going to have to accommodate stormwater. He's going to have to accommodate landscaping and buffering. It's going to be very difficult to develop this any way you look at it, but it would probably be even more problematic to develop it residentially than to develop it commercially. but it's going to require some out-of-the-box thinking by the applicant just to really get anything on that property. For the proposed comp plan amendment and the rezoning, we looked at the criteria that we look at in all such cases. We looked at compatibility, we looked at concurrency, we looked at environmental impact, and we looked at consistency with the comp plan. From a compatibility standpoint, the proposed comp plan change and rezoning fit in well. It would really be an extension of the commercial industrial land use and the OCO zoning that's to the west. There wouldn't be any compatibility problems with the adjacent residential because that's across the 200-foot Indian River Boulevard right-of-way. From a concurrency standpoint, there is sufficient capacity in all the concurrency facilities, so there is not a concurrency problem with this. There aren't going to be any environmental impacts with this property. It has been altered in the past. From a comp plan consistency standpoint, we look at all policies in the comp plan, and this is consistent with all policies. There are a couple in particular. Policy 14.3 requires that certain criteria be met in order to approve a comp plan amendment, and it has to meet at least one of these criteria. Staff feels it meets several. It was really an oversight not to have redesignated this back in the late 80s when the remainder parcel was created. It's a change in circumstances with the boulevard actually have been built there and severing this property from the rest of the parent property. So we feel that it meets land use policy 14.3. We have another land use policy, policy 1.22, that relates to expansion of nodes and requires that nodes be at least 70% developed. This one is not, but this does meet the exception criteria for that policy. So staff's position is that this proposed comp plan change does meet all the policies in the comp plan. So staff's conclusion is that the requested land use change and rezoning are compatible with surrounding properties. They're consistent with the comp plan. They meet the concurrency test, and they won't create any environmental impacts. So staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that you approve the proposed small-scale land use amendment and the rezoning.
Thank you, Mr. Keating, on the presentation. Commissioners, any questions?
Bob, how are they going to access the property? Are we going to come in from that other node or directly off 37th or Indian River Boulevard?
Actually, it's problematic coming in from the west because there is a conservation easement on the property line to the property to the west. Either way, its access is not going to be good. It's really, we'll look at what the applicant proposes. It can be from the boulevard, it can be from 37th Street, but we'll look at it at that time.
If there's any agreement between the property owners, do we have any flexibility to move the conservation easement, perhaps take some for access from the west and move it closer to along Indian River Boulevard of some kind?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so we do have.
If the applicant could replace the amount of conservation property, yes, it could be modified.
Okay.
And then I assume the applicant realizes this is a real can of worms and that they're moving forward with full knowledge of the difficulties ahead.
We have spared no effort to try to tell the applicant how difficult it will be to develop the property.
All right. Thank you, Bob.
All right. Commissioners, any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll open this up to the public hearing. Is there anybody that wishes to address this issue? Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Scott McGuire with Knight McGuire Associates, representing William Gregory Construction. Mostly I'm here just to answer some questions if anybody has any. Obviously, it is a very, very small and tight site. It's pretty clear to me that the appropriate use is just a very small single-user office building, or perhaps combining this property with the property to the west for potential expansion of that facility. Those are the only real potential uses for this property.
Okay.
And as Bob noted, it's certainly going to be very difficult, whether it's as is now as a residential project or if it were commercial. The same issues all apply. So we're not creating any new issues by doing this. We're just changing the use of the property.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioners? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this time, we will close the public hearing and let the record show that ample opportunity to address this issue.
Staff recommendation.
Got a motion from Commissioner Wheeler and a second from Commissioner O'Brien. No further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. We're going to take a brief recess, and then let's take about a 10-minute recess, and we'll reconvene.
Bob.
Meeting will come back to order. Okay, we left off with the public hearing, and now we'll go to the second public hearing, which is the proposed ordinance amendment to section 207.05 of the Indian River County Code to change the beginning sale date of business tax receipts from August 1 to July 1 of each year. This matter is legislative, and I'm assuming this is going to be a budget issue, or Joe Baird? Or
this will be mine.
Okay, thank you.
A year ago, the state legislature changed the law on business tax receipts. They used to be called occupational licenses, and what it really is a tax on the privilege to do business in the county. It's a $40 a year tax, and what the legislature changed was the beginning sale date that the tax collector could begin to sell these licenses from August 1st to July 1st, and that's all the change amounts to. It's simply authorizing the tax collector to begin selling these business tax receipts July 1st rather than August 1st, so we can be consistent with the state law as amended.
Commissioners, any questions? Seeing none, we'll open this up to the public. Do I have any public comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Move staff recommendation.
Got a motion from Commissioner O'Brien with a second from Commissioner Flesher. We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Now we have the public discussion item, which is a request to speak from Mr. Mark C. Foster, IRC. Also we have the county attorney's matter on this also. I think probably, Commissioners, tell you what let's do. Let's have the county attorney give your presentation on it first, since it was under your matters, and then we'll have Mr. Foster, if he needs to say something or elaborate on it. Then we'll have your side of it, then we'll make our decision after that. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Chairman. In January of this year, the company Mr. Foster represents requested a 2-year extension on a contract that they had with the county to provide lot fill within Huntington Place subdivision. And at that time, the board conceptually approved a 2-year extension conditioned on amending the deed restrictions. As they were written, they required that any lot owner within the subdivision would have had to have met the same 2-year time frame to fill the lots. And the Commission's request was that if we extended Mr. Foster's obligation by 2 years, that any lot owner in the subdivision, and I think at that time there were 4 people that purchased lots, they would also be granted the same 2-year extension through an amendment to the deed restrictions. The second condition was that the letter of credit that supported the obligation to provide the lot fill also be extended for a 2-year period plus time period to draw it. The contract had a provision for 120 days to cure after default, and followed by 60 days to pull the letter of credit if the default was not cured. And at that time, there had been some discussion about perhaps a redesign of the subdivision. There were no drainage easements on the side lots. I believe everything was to drain off the filled lot and then flow to the streets into a lake system. And there was some discussion about perhaps doing a replat to provide side lot drainage easements that would allow the placement of pipe to collect the drainage and direct it to the stormwater system without requiring the lot fill, in the hope of preserving some of the pine trees on site. But at this point, we've drafted and presented a modification to the contract, which is on page 226, which simply extends the obligation to fill for 2 years, conditioned on amendment to the letter of credit to extend it, and amendment to the deed restrictions to allow the lot owners additional time to fill the lots. And that's really where we are. I'm not sure what Mr. Foster would like to say, but...
Okay. All right. Mr. Foster, welcome.
Morning, gentlemen. My name is Mark Foster, and I'm president of Foster IRC, LLC. We own over 400 acres in Indian River County. I'm here today to discuss one of our projects, as you know, the Huntington Place project. And I'm hoping I can let common sense prevail today. The reality is I can't extend Mr. Collins' agreement because no bank will give me a letter of credit because of the credit crunch. I need the $1.7 million to survive this credit crunch, to help pay overhead and to help pay off debt and debt service. It's pretty difficult and rough out there, as I think everybody knows. If the letter of credit is called, then the county will be required to chop down hundreds of trees and fill 140 lots that won't be built on for over 10 years. Further, probably the way that would end up is the bank will end up owning the subdivision and no one will maintain it, like we have done an excellent job doing for the last 3 years, and you'll have another scorched earth dead subdivision in Indian River County. After this presentation today, I pray that one of you will make a motion not to call the letter of credit when it expires and just to simply let it expire. So I pray that you'll let me survive this financial crisis and let the subdivision survive and let us to continue doing business in Indian River County into the future and into perpetuity. I think everybody's pretty familiar with this. There was a PowerPoint presentation today, and I'm not sure if can you get that going for us, or? No, it's not.
If you have one, we have somebody who can help you with that.
I'm not sure if it's really necessary today, but I can. We do have some pictures, and it shows the difference between a community that has kept all the trees and manages to manicure the lots as you build the homes and box out trees and keep all the trees in the swales as we want, and as I think pretty much most future subdivisions should be in the future. And the contrasting subdivisions, which are to remove all of the trees and bring in sand and then let it sit there for the next 10 years while we're waiting for the market to come back and we slowly build this out. We had we have 140 lots out there fully platted, and we had 110 of them pre-sold. And then right as we were getting our final plat, the county told us that we needed to bond for this requirement, this lot fill requirement, and we could not get a bond. So then they would accept a letter of credit. Obviously, I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice because I was going to lose all of my sales, and it was going to be financial Armageddon for us because we owed the bank lots of money. And we had all this pre-sold before we put a shovel in the ground, so we didn't just do this on a speculative basis. So anyway, they refused to give us the plat unless we put up the money. We use a Florida bank, so we took our California cash, put it in a bank. That bank issued a letter of credit to a Florida bank, and a Florida bank, Fifth Third, issued the letter of credit to Indian River County. Unfortunately, Fifth Third Bank will not extend this letter of credit, which is why I'm here today. The financial crisis not only has really hurt a lot of people in Indian River County, it's been Armageddon for all the developers and builders. So unfortunately, during that 4-month period while we were negotiating this lot fill agreement, which we were never required to do to begin with, we lost all of our sales except for 4. So we gave them the letter credit, and then Armageddon hit anyway. Of course, the bank still wants to be paid whether or not I close those lots, and I was scared to death that I wouldn't be able to close them, so I agreed on this. Probably in hindsight, obviously in hindsight, I shouldn't have agreed to the posting the money, because I could have used that money to pay off debt, and I would have been better off to not get the plat. But citing drainage concerns, the county agreed to allow 24 months for the lots to be filled to 70% of finished grade. So to date, no lot construction has commenced. We haven't been able to sell any lots. The lots are worth half of our cost. Staff is still insisting that the lots be cleared and filled despite the lack of drainage issues. They've really cited no concerns other than drainage and essentially maintain that a deal is a deal and they have our money. Given the lack of drainage problems, we've offered to monitor and address any pending development issues, and staff has still been insisting that the lots be filled. In August of 2008, if you can forward through that a bit, just keep going a little bit. One more. In August of 2008, Hurricane Faye dumped approximately 18 to 20 inches of rain, and the map below indicates the areas of the subdivision where the drainage progress was tracked. There are only a few areas where the storm produced standing water. Those spots where there are red dots are the areas that we photographed and tracked. And if you go to the next slide, we document the drainage of some of the wettest areas. Now, this one area on lot 37 actually is a wetland, and we got the St. John's permit to fill that, which expires in November of 2010, and they have indicated that they will extend it between 2 and 20 years. That's a big spread, but that's what we were told. So you can see it in 9 days it dried out. If you go to the next slide, that's lot 59. After 6 days, you can see it's all drained. Next slide, please. Lot 103. 3 days, it's drained out. And the next slide. 2 weeks following, it's almost completely drained. Again, that's one of the wetlands that will be filled when it's time to build a home there. Next slide, please. That's what the subdivision looks like now. And what we would like to do, of course, is to use common sense and use the money to put in models and specs when the time is right. Actually, we have a national home builder who has indicated, actually we have a letter of intent signed, that they do want to put in 3 models and specs in this subdivision, which is over all the other less expensive subdivisions, because they really like the trees. And if you look behind us, that's a very small subdivision, Fox Run, which has gone bankrupt, and they just got rid of every single tree on their subdivision. So we're just proposing that we selectively remove these trees during construction as the lots are filled. Now if you go to the next slide. That's the area. So we would lose about 80% of the foliage right now, which would be obviously a shame. It'd be filled with sand, which will blow around for the next 10 years. And so inside those red lines are the areas that if the letter of credit is called, the county will be required to remove all those trees and fill all those lots. And then next slide. So that's a typical subdivision in Indian River County, and that's what ours would look like once it's filled. This is what we're trying to avoid, and this is not what the national builder wants, to try to market homes in this down market. Further, we believe that the wind and the rain will erode that over the next many years and make it look worse. So we are really praying that we don't have to do this. Further, we probably won't be around to even maintain that, and the bank will get it, and then it'll get sold off, and eventually someone else will buy it. Now, if you go to the next slide, that'll show what we're looking to do. Is manicure them and keep the trees in the swales. We just would really don't want to do the scorched earth approach, and further, I think policy, maybe in the future of Indian River County should be to try to be more green and save more trees, and really only remove the trees as you need them in the places that you need them. I think Indian River County has become approved as a green county, and I think that doing something like this and beginning to change policies to try to preserve trees and make it look better, I think was probably the first step to becoming, one of the greenest counties in Florida. I think most people would agree that that's a good thing. And I think that the other, if you look at one of the LDRs, section 927.07, Indian River County specifically is trying to save trees, and in that ordinance, and I'll just try not to waste too much of your time here, but the intent is to preserve and protect trees and native vegetation in unincorporated Indian River County during the land development and construction process. It's also the intent of this chapter to ensure that the health of preserved trees and native vegetation will be maintained. Trees and native vegetation are recognized for their importance in shading, cooling, reducing noise and wind, preventing soil erosion, producing oxygen, filtering dust, absorbing carbon dioxide, enhancing aesthetics, and increasing the economic value of real property, which is one of the real reasons why I'm here today. If to use my $1.7 million to cut down all of my trees on my property and on the 4 lots that we've sold would be just an economic hardship. It would be much more difficult to ever develop this property and to manage to bring in the builders to develop it in the future. Further, the builder who we're discussing with, if this happens, doesn't want to do the subdivision. So it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy and just another scorched earth dead project, which we are really trying to avoid. So to achieve the objects listed above, the county deems it necessary, this is in your own LDRs, to provide for the protection and preservation of trees, to prevent the reduction of the existing tree canopy, and to prevent the unnecessary removal of trees and other native vegetation. The purpose of this ordinance is to provide standards for the protection of trees and native vegetation as part of the land development. Anyway, it goes on and on and on about saving trees and how we should all try in this county to save the trees. So, given the fact that there really aren't any drainage problems and that being a green county, Indian River really wants to do what's right in saving trees and trying to help the environment, I implore you today to let that letter of credit expire and to have staff work with us. And there has been no problems for 3 years. We have no letters from staff saying there's a drainage problem, but if there happens to be ever, we will do whatever it takes to do what staff wants to alleviate any drainage problems. So I thank you for your time in this matter and hope that common sense can prevail today.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Commissioners, any questions?
Mr. Chair. Yeah, Mr. Foster, did you find out the 4 lots that were sold?
Yes, I did. It's lot 36, 45, 89, and 98. Now, I don't know if you have a copy of the plat in front of you.
Yeah,
Do that once again, Mr. Foster.
It's 36, 45, 89, and 98. So, unfortunately, they're kind of scattered around a bit.
Yes, they are. Well,
I actually don't. I didn't put the plat in my PowerPoint, but
we can do this.
You know, and
I just marked it off. You would like to put that on the
Elmo?
overhead? No,
Yeah.
Elmo. If I have it correctly, sir.
yes, that's correct.
That's my level of expertise.
Zoom out just a little bit. I don't if.
Do that. That's good.
Look at you. Tell you what.
There you go.
Sit over there.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, they kind of moved around. I know where we're going, which is for us to relinquish our plat, and I understand that, and we'd be willing to do that. Maybe plats or certain areas. Again, we do have a national builder that is ready, or we have a letter of intent. We don't have a contract signed to build models and specs on this site if the trees aren't all removed and lots filled. So obviously this is a sort of a complicated issue for the city attorney and the county, but I do believe that common sense and justice can prevail here, and we can work all this out and make Indian River County a better place and a place that we can continue doing business into the future.
Okay, Commissioner O'Brien, you have any other questions?
Many questions of Mr. Foster. I just, when this came before us back in January, I got out and walked the property, and it's a really nice slash pine palmetto hammock out there. And I walked it again last week, and it's still in the same condition. And I personally cannot see us going in there and bulldozing every tree just for the sake of putting fill in there. I think as local government, we need to find a solution here where we don't have to just bulldoze 20 acres just for the sake of bulldozing it.
Of pulling a letter of credit.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the solution is, but I think we need to find one where it does not involve bulldozing and fill for the sake of bulldozing.
Okay.
I would agree with Chairman, I did take the opportunity to walk the property as well, and up until just now, I did not know where the lots were and how they were dispersed. Some of my thought process was perhaps maybe we can look at a phasing in of the project, and I would be happy to suggest that, but it doesn't seem to be the case. But with that in mind, these letters of credits are here to hold the developer's feet to the fire. And, there's just no feet here. And the only fire we're going to do is that we're going to scorch our public. We're going to scorch the environment. We're going to scorch the citizens of this county we're going to take this letter of credit and tear down green space and natural drainage. And it's a beautiful environment, and I understand Commissioner O'Brien, you walked it. I hope you have the same feeling I do. It does appear to be, for all intents and purposes, a conservation area, except for a few of the accoutrements that have been established in the infrastructure. With that said, I think it would be a travesty. Will, what would occur at this point if we allowed this letter of credit to expire, and could we not initiate a developer's agreement to go forward?
If you did it would obviously be an unsecured agreement with nothing to bind the developer. I think the real issue here is how can this property be drained? And apparently, as it was platted, the idea was to fill the lots and have sheet flow off into a drainage system. But I can't speak to drainage, what will work, what will protect the residents in the future.
It drains now.
And at that,
my suggestion, if there weren't 4 lot owners out there, would be to vacate the plat and start over when the market's right. But unless those 4 lot owners are willing to work with Mr. Foster, that's not really a viable option.
And just along the lines of the drainage, I got a email here from, Mr. Baird, I guess you sent it to me, forwarded it to me, excuse me, from Jim Davis.
Yes.
And Commissioners, did y'all receive a copy of the email? I'll read it to you real quick. It's it's from David, to Joe Baird from Jim Davis, carbon copy David Hayes, and well, everybody involved in this scenario. And it says, Joe, in speaking with David Hayes of Huntington Place subdivision, there's been no recent formal discussion on a complete redesign of the entire drainage system for Huntington Place. Since most lots will drain adequately when individual lots are built upon, as a temporary condition, the side lots may drain to the neighborhood undeveloped lots prior to the adjoining lots being filled, but this should be cleaned, it should create no long-range drainage problems. The Attorney's Office has not had any discussion with us on major issues or redesign. If the developer cannot renew the letter of credit, lot owners should be aware of ponding on undeveloped lots until they are filled. And so the long and short of it is that the way I interpret that is this is really not a big issue on the drainage side of it right now.
Thank you. I believe that's true. There isn't a drainage issue, and actually, that one of the lot owners is here today, and you could ask him to speak and see how he feels on this situation.
And we'll open it up to the public in just a minute if you want. Yes, Commissioner Solari.
Will there be some chance to ask staff some questions?
Absolutely.
I'd like to ask Mr. Keys some questions if I could, or whoever he recommends for.
It might be an engineering question, probably more. Well, the LDR could be community development, but I imagine, gentlemen, if y'all would, what is specifically your question, and then we'll get the right person here.
Well, I wanted to ask if there are any problems with the subdivision today, any concerns as we stand today, if there are any needs today for actually cutting the trees and fill that we're not aware of. I mean, I'm not seeing any, but I'd like to hear from staff if they see any needs today. So the first question is Chris, how are you? Thank you. Do you see any problems with the subdivision today? Are there any concerns that have been brought to your office?
No, we haven't seen anything as yet.
Is there any need that you see from going forward from now, say the next 5, 6, 10 years, for cutting down the trees and filling throughout the subdivision?
Our concerns were possibly creating wetlands, and they've shown that that has not happened. So I would say that we don't see a problem in that area. Now, when they decide to start building and putting in the homes, like Jim said, there will be the home sites built up, and the drainage will drain onto the neighbors. That's the main problem, I think, at this point.
Now, will they drain onto the neighbors if the neighbors haven't developed a lot, or if the neighbors have developed a lot?
No, that's the undeveloped lot.
Okay, so you're not impacting any.
Nobody's
living there.
Correct.
Okay, and I don't know if you'd have an opinion on this, but which would be better, to leave it in its natural state now and let a slow development take place, or do the cut and fill today? I mean, the pictures say that you don't want to do the cut and fill today, but from a drainage standpoint.
I would actually hate to see them denude this property. It's a nice property right now. When they do build homes, most of the trees are going to be gone. There probably will be able to save some of the trees, but if they're not going to be developing homes for the next 10 years, I see no reason to go in there at this point and fill the lot. However, there is a possibility that we looked at possible interim drainage facilities that could be put in, yard drains, piping to the ponds as an interim process. That way, anything that does happen, homes go in intermittently, they wouldn't destroy the trees, the vegetation. It would still look like a nice development, and it would have positive drainage. They have not come in for any type of design that we've looked at, and I think that that's something that they really don't want to do.
Chairman. Thanks, Chairman. Let's see, Commissioner, you haven't spoke yet.
Just a question. I drove by the site. I didn't walk it. And I also drove by the site at US 1 and 510, which is a desert filled with weeds now and sand piles. And
oh, yes, the WCI project.
It's
okay.
a real eyesore on a main thoroughfare.
Okay, yes, yes.
I don't want to see that happen anyplace else in the county, let alone here. Secondly, is there any way, Will, that, I mean, you could kind of take this and set it aside in limbo, for instance, without the letter of credit, but when they get ready to develop it, to say, okay, that kicks back in again, so we have a secured agreement, and just say that, yeah, we'll work with you and let this set as is, but when you get ready to develop it, you're going to have to meet those standards and post that letter of credit or whatever, so the county's still protected and they're protected.
Well,
what this is a long-term problem. We're looking at a short-term solution that doesn't work.
it's not clear to me why we have this agreement and security in the first place.
Is it a part of our ordinance?
No.
It's not an LDR?
In fact, I can't think of another subdivision where we've had contracts to fill lots. To me, it must have something to do with the drainage requirement.
Oh, okay.
So, why was it put in?
If our engineering staff says that they think it's draining adequately, then we could probably release a letter of credit, I think, in this case, if it's an unusual set of circumstances, and my engineering staff has been out there. Now, our question is protecting as they do the lots moving forward, and maybe we'll need an agreement doing that, but I think that based on what Jim Davis and Chris Kafer have said and looked at it professionally, we probably don't need the letter of credit, but we probably need some type of agreement as it moves forward.
That's where, I've seen
Am I wrong?
subdivisions.
Am I wrong?
Why can't we look at a smaller bond for drainage?
Well, Mr. Foster?
Yes, I just wanted to say we originally sold these lots, forward sold. We are not selling lots to any private owners anymore. We are only going to build homes, so there won't be the issue of a private lot owner other than these four. One is here today. You can talk to him. Other than these four, there won't be an issue of building a house next to a private lot owner and have them come to the county and say, hey, they're draining water on my property. There are also ways to do this with drainage easements between each lot that we can do. So if a letter of credit is required to even get going again to start homes, then there won't be any homes started because it's just way too much money to get going to build 5 homes. So just so you guys know, there won't be any private lot owners other than these 4. It's all going to be professional builders building on the lots that they own and manicuring those. Further, we are going to try to save all this trees in the drainage swells and box out. It won't be clearing all the trees, as one of the gentlemen before me said.
And this plays directly into the item that I see coming up here on the community development, is to have some kind of waiver, some kind of opportunity to in a developer's agreement or something like that, when you see the times change or a policy that's not quite working, for us to be able to have the opportunity to change that. So, but that's on the next discussion item, and so I really would like to see us be able to save the trees as long as possible, be able to keep these trees on the development, because clearly that's what's going to make it more aesthetically pleasing. And let's move forward with this.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to allow the letter of credit to expire and direct our legal staff to work out a developer agreement on the drainage issue if one arises until the project is reinstituted.
Comment?
Yes, sir.
I really don't see any point in having a developer's agreement that's unsecured. It's just a promise to do something in the future, and they're either going to do it or they won't. If there's no security, why bother with the paper? It seems to me that the control on this is when you issue a CO for each individual house. Has the lot been properly filled? Is it to the proper grade? If it is, you give them a certificate of occupancy.
Can we enforce this without it?
Well, I don't know why we have it in the first place. That's what I said earlier.
I amend my motion.
So just
To allow the letter of credit to expire.
I'll second that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
For discussion, I think what might be cleaner and easier is just to vacate the contract for lot fill, and that way it takes that entire burden off the property. The letter of credit becomes useless at that point and can expire on its own, and that way the lots can be filled individually as a builder or owner moves forward. So I think it's just cleaner if we just take that entire burden of this contract for lot fill off the property.
I see no difference in my initial motion stance.
But your motion would still have this contract in there. You're vacating the letter of credit, but the requirement to fill all the lots remains.
It is presumed that that would also be vacated.
No, we have a contract that we need to vacate.
Well, I think we're arguing the same point.
Will?
I think Mr. O'Brien's right. If you're going to let go of the security, you should
vacate the fill.
You should do away with a contract that the letter of credit is securing.
And to include that is to vacate the fill.
Right.
Okay.
Now, I think it's important that these requirements for lot fill have been imposed on the 4 lot owners as well. And I still think that they should go forward, and if we're deleting a time requirement on lot fill, that they should probably amend their deed restrictions to require lot fill at the time of development or something, so that the lot owner is not in a jeopardized position.
Mr. Foster, would that be an issue?
Actually, I think that it won't be a problem at all. All the lot owners would love. There's one here. You can bring him up today. Would absolutely be ecstatic if they were not forced to, remove their trees and fill the lots right now. I think they would love to get rid of that lot fill agreement and have the letters of credit expire and not have that onerous on them. And you can ask one of them if you'd like.
I'd just like to add an amendment to that motion that the 4 lot owners be excluded from having to fill prior to building.
Excellent.
Commissioners, can I make sure, Jim, do you have any problem with that, Jim Davis? Because I spoke on his behalf.
This has been a dilemma for Public Works. Since we did have some subdivisions previously where the lots were not cleared and filled, and we did have some wetlands created, and certain property owners bought lots and they went to build and they found some depressional wetlands that were created from the perimeter berming and the drainage system being put in, but the lot's not filled. So that's why we instituted this lot fill requirement, and they posted the letter of credit so that would not happen. Now that the subdivision infrastructure has been in for a few years and we see the percolation ability of the lots, that doesn't seem to be a problem in this location, but in other parts of the county, by creating perimeter berms and perimeter changes in the topography without filling the depressions, you can get some wetland creation that would aggravate future lot filling. In this particular site, I don't think it's going to be a problem, particularly the internal lots where you have stormwater tracts and lakes built that are lower. The perimeter berms could be a problem in perimeter lots, but it does seem like this site has good percolation and we're not creating any wetlands by disturbing the perimeter. So we don't have strong feelings about this particular site, but the reason the requirement was placed was because of problems we have had in other parts of the county, and actually lots being turned into wetlands because the fill wasn't added.
Yeah. Okay. just real quick, so just to get back focused on the motion, are you willing to accept that?
Motion to allow the letter of credit to expire, vacate the fill order, and not hold the 4 landowners to the lot fill as required.
Just to kind of tighten that up, if we just vacate the fill order, does that accomplish everything?
No, and you probably can't accomplish anything because the obligation to fill the individual lots is imposed through the deed restrictions. Mr. Foster will have to amend that himself.
Okay.
So then,
what exactly needs to be in this motion? I mean, I think we're here in the framework, but just, I want to make sure.
Allow the letter of credit to expire, rescind the contract, and ask Mr. Foster to amend his deed restrictions so that the 4 lot owners don't have to fill until the time of building either.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I will second that.
Okay. Question for Jim. When you create a wetland on a platted lot like that, is that one of our requirements or is that a St. John's?
No, it's not a requirement. It's something that happens when...
Is it our regulation that flags it and we require mitigation, or St. John's?
It depends on the size of the wetland. If it's a very less than a half acre, I believe St. John's really doesn't get involved.
Okay, so I'm trying to look at this as when the original site plan came in, there was wetlands identified on the site.
No, what I'm saying is that...
Right, but let me just walk through it, Jim. So during the site plan, wetlands were identified. Mr. Foster had to get a permit from St. John's to fill those wetland areas and mitigate or whatever that resolution was. Now we have a platted site with all of these individual lots are less than a half an acre, I imagine. And so even if some water puddles because of the berms, I don't see where that flags an environmental issue that would prevent that lot owner from building his home at some point in the future. I mean, if St. John's doesn't get involved in less than half acre parcels, and these are all less than half acre, I don't see why that was such a big issue.
Ponding could go across lot lines.
Yeah, ponding could go across lot.
There could be 3 lots that are making up a pond, possibly.
Okay. Any other questions before I open this up? Okay. Anybody from the public wish to speak on this? Ms. Chandler, welcome.
Good morning. I'm Penny Chandler, President, Indian River County Chamber of Commerce. I just want to bring up, first of all, these folks are not members of the Chamber. We don't have any real pony in this race, but when I take a look at the issue in general, first of all, I thought what was interesting was that there was a letter of credit for fill, which I thought was inconsistent with what is customarily done. I could be mistaken about that, but I believe that that's true. I think we've spent the last year as a community trying to bring about changes so that Indian River County would be perceived as more business friendly. And I think when we take a look at this particular instance, we have a situation where if this letter's pulled, a company may well go out of business. We have a situation where a company that's now excited about Indian River County is not excited about Indian River County any longer. We lose some credibility about our ability to work with businesses. And the idea to me of, and this is personal, not the chamber talking, but the idea of creating another uncompelling, non-attractive parcel of development land is just, I don't think, where our county wants to head. I think that they've identified that the property drains adequately, and I would suggest that perhaps the solution to the entire problem is Senate Bill 360, which was passed this session, which allows some provisions for local communities to deal with development issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Anybody else wish to speak? Mr. Paladin, name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. Joseph Paladin. I'm the president of Black Swan Consulting. I'm also the president of Land Coast Construction and Development. Speaking as a developer, right down the street, I happen to have a subdivision called Parkland Estates that I developed without clearing the entire subdivision. We cleared a number of lots, and we worked on selling those lots off, and we sold all the lots off to builders, not individuals. And I can't tell you, there's not a day or a week that doesn't go by where the adjacent neighbors, forget about the people that are buying lots in there, forget about my ability to sell lots easier because I didn't clear the subdivision. All the neighboring subdivisions have complimented us on leaving those trees, that they said it's so great that you didn't take all these trees down. And even though, like it's been stated earlier, a lot of those trees will have to come down, when you're building out a subdivision slowly, like we used to before this big boom came, you have other trees being planted. You have other houses that are doing landscaping. So as you take the other trees down, you don't have that desert effect out there. But the neighbors, which we want to please because they already are Indian River County citizens, they are very happy building out a subdivision where we leave the trees up and just take them down as we build the houses and sell the lots. They were just ecstatic with it. So I think you need to take that into consideration. You're not really doing something to hurt the people that already live here, besides helping the people that are buying lots and building houses there. It's better for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon. Anybody else wish to speak? Welcome. Mr. Robinson, name and address for the record, please.
I'm Peter Robinson, live at 315 Great Creek Road, Vero Beach, Florida. I'm Vice President of Laurel Homes. And as I sat here and listened to this, I remember that when I first came here back in 1974, and there were probably only Wesley and me and a few other people around back then, that was kind of how we always did it. The lands were platted. You went out and built the house. When you got around to building the house, you laid out the lot for the house, and it worked. Then we got these bureaucracies that started coming in, and we started having land development regulations and all these different requirements where everybody jumped on the developer and said, you got to do all this stuff out front. And if you don't do it out front, you don't get to do it. And then we had the boom where the banks were happy to give anybody money who claimed they had anything to do with land. And so then we came up, let's get everything done out front, and the letters of credit flow in and all these things, and everybody thought they were protected. Well, you're not protected. The market makes the market. And we've got to go back to the old ways of doing things. And and I think you need to review a lot of the letter of credit requirements, because we don't need all those letter of credits. And you can't kill the developer up front, because then everything goes away, and your tax base goes away, and your schools go away, and all those things happen. So it's time now to start reviewing. That's all I'm saying. And we built a pretty damn good community, and we didn't have all those rules. When I put in Laurelwood, I remember we called up and we said, you got any rules for sidewalks? And they said, no, just do whatever you want. So go out there. Those sidewalks are there. They've been there. We called them up and said, you got any rules for streetlights? They didn't have any rules for streetlights. Streetlights have been there for 30 years. People can do things if you let them do it. But once you start creating all these rules, you make things tough on everybody. And, this is one of my competitors. But you need to, go back to the old way of doing things and let all of us compete against each other, and the market will take care of us.
Chairman?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on what Peter said, because, I like what he said, but the reason we got where we're at is because you got that, let's say, the proverbial 10%, and then we make up rules that penalize 90%, and that's what's happened. We've had subdivisions in here that haven't done what they were supposed to do, like Peter and Deb have done, or other developers, and that's how we end up with these rules, and it's universal. It's not just Indian River County.
Yeah, interesting when you say that, too. I mean, if McCants Park was in the county, according to our LDRs, you couldn't build that subdivision today. And it's one of the most beautiful places in Indian River County. But because our rules wouldn't allow that. Mr. Thorpe, go ahead, and then Jim, you can wrap up.
Hopefully, one last speaker from the public. Name is Michael Thorpe, 4303 Sunset Drive. I'm here. I have two hats. I'll be very brief. This has been kind of long, and probably already have your minds made up. But it's a matter of being a business owner, and I'm one of the few lot owners out there. These gentlemen, it's a family business, came into town, specifically wanted to have a landmark property for their first development in Indian River County. At great cost and expense, found this site, which was one of the few wooded sites available, went through great pains, did everything they were supposed to do, left some preserve areas. You drive out there now, I was out there last night, we took some photographs, didn't make it here today, but it's beautiful. It's nothing's going on, it's beautiful. And I went out and took pictures of 3 or 4 subdivisions that we all know what they look like, where they were clear cut or they were old orange groves or whatever. And they're just terrible, and the grass is 5 feet high, and it's so you've got something that's beautiful, and as a lot owner, the reason I bought the lot is that I bought into the whole marketing premise, one of the few wooded subdivisions that was available, bought one of the premium lots in there because and only because of the fact that it was wooded. Would have had no interest if it was an old orange grove, muddy, sandy grasslands or whatever. And I think going forward, if you allow them to continue, any builder that goes in there is going to save as many trees. Yeah, you're going to lose a lot of them, but there's ways to design a tree. You flip it to the left, you flip it, or a house, you flip it to the left or to the right. Why wouldn't you save? This is an age of environmentalists, and the environment, shade and everything associated with the trees. And plus, this is Indian River County. We believe, we're creating a great environment, for our kids and grandkids. Why not have something that's a little better than the rest? And I ask you not to force these guys to clear cut this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorpe. Mr. Davis, you have anything you want to add?
I just wanted to mention on this specific property along Kings Highway, our codes require a berm and a landscape buffer. When you institute the berm to the east and then you fill and place a roadway to the west, all those perimeter lots now are between a berm and a filled roadway. So that creates a high point and the lots are lower. So it is possible, if you do not have good percolating soils, to trap the water on the whole row of lots on the east of the subdivision, which could turn into a wetland.
But
that was our concern.
Right, and I understand the rationale, but that's the point behind this. This is a sandy soil that does percolate well, and in fact, the lots that are the ones where the wetlands or the lower spots are, they're closer to the what would that be? The northwest corner of this property. It looks like that's the low area, if there is one over there. It's not up against that area that you're talking about where the berm is.
Yeah, but some of the subdivisions before this one were platted, we found that problem was being created. They were berming the perimeter, they were filling the roadways, they were trapping water. Those particular subdivisions didn't percolate well, and wetlands were being created. And that's why this project came later and the requirement was placed.
Okay. Brooks?
Aaron. Sorry. Just a quick, just to go off what Jim had said, that concern had come up, Aaron Bowles.
Name and address for the record.
Sorry.
We all know you. But.
Yeah, that concern had come up previously, and we had gone through a few different drainage.
You got to give your name and address for the record.
Oh, I did. Aaron Bowles, MBV Engineering. 2455 14th Avenue.
It makes their job easy whenever they're writing this down.
Sorry. This concern had come up in the past, and we had run through a few different drainage analysis, specifically with the future situation of a few different lots being filled and the interior lots being surrounded by the filled lots, with all the associated drainage coming onto the individual 1 or 2 lots. We run those analysis and determine that percolation would allow those lots to drain within a day or so, which is well within St. John's requirements of 72 hours. So we didn't anticipate any problems with wetlands.
Thank you.
Chairman?
Yes.
Unless there's somebody who wants to speak against this, I'd like to call a question.
Anybody want to speak against this? Okay, question's been called, and this is to
let the letter credit expire, rescind the lot fill contract, and request Mr. Foster to amend his deed restrictions so that the 4 lot owners don't have to fill until the time of the building permit.
Okay. Yeah, and I believe I seconded that. So if there's no further discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. My family employees, thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you. Have a safe
Need
trip.
that map.
Okay, that concludes the attorney matter and public discussion. And now we'll move on to the county administrator's matters. Mr. Baird.
Yes, we have in front of you a request to waive the nonprofit fee for to have bleachers for Dollars for Scholars. They want 3 sets of bleachers. Staff has no problem. We've waived them for about every nonprofit this year. It's up to the board. However, I do not have the ability to make that decision. The normal charge is $175 a day for the big bleachers. They're asking for 3 sets for nonprofit.
Move staff recommendation.
I'll second that, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Wright, when this came up before several times this year, I'd like to see an item in our budget, the budgets for this, because we either set a criteria that we're going to do this consistently and across the board for nonprofits, or we set a criteria we're not, or we're going to set a line item item in the budget where we can draw from, so we know where we are. But I think we need to be consistent one way or the other. We need to know what the cost is annually to the county.
Yeah, we waived about $23,000 this year in fees, which we usually have budgeted. We won't meet that requirement. I would like to suggest, since we've done it all year, why don't we make it that next fiscal year we won't waive for nonprofit. We're doing it this year, but we won't waive it because there is a nonprofit fee and a for-profit fee. We actually have it's less if you're a nonprofit.
I think Commissioner Wheeler was going a little different direction with it versus not the non-waivering of it. Actually have it as a budget item whenever we do to cover that fee. Right, Commissioner?
Well, I had 3 options. One, let's budget for it and draw from that budget. We're out of money, we're out of money. Or let's have a policy that we waive it for nonprofits, or that we don't, or for profit, and we do and we don't. I just like a consistent policy, so we treat everybody equally. And I think, so that's where I'm at. But I'd like to know what the cost is. Joe says about $23,000. He's recommending, I guess, if I heard him correctly, that the next fiscal year we not waive fees.
And we had addressed this at the Tourist Development Council meeting, and of course this wouldn't qualify. There was some discussion. It was ultimately rejected to take money out of the Tourist Development Council for the nonprofit stage rental like this. But even, dollar per scholar, surely we couldn't justify that as a tourist draw, and use those funds for that. So,
Mr. Chairman, may I, if I could, I seconded the motion, and I'll go along with this. But when we get done with this, I'd like to either a motion or a consensus that Mr. Baird bring back a plan before the next fiscal year as to how we want to address this annually.
Okay, that's fine. I will say that most of the costs, all we're doing is charging for the labor and the fuel to set up. And when we're doing this, it's the park maintenance people that are pulled off and the overtime. That's all. But we don't have a problem.
And I guess, and I don't know whether it's the union contract, but I remember having a similar issue like this on the school board with bus drivers. It was always the senior bus drivers that got the overtime that cost you the most amount to put up in this instance, it could be the stages. I don't know whether there's a cost savings of having perhaps somebody responsible for this, that if they did, instead of overtime, perhaps working on some comp time, if they worked on Saturday to be able to even it out like we do in some other parts of.
Well, that would be the second part, bringing back a policy.
Okay.
Well, let's get dollars for scholars there, bleachers first.
Yeah, I like that. We've got a motion, or what was your motion to approve?
No, that was my motion, seconded by Commissioner Wheeler.
To approve dollar for scholars request?
Approve the dollar for scholars.
Thank you very much. And is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. Next we have this is the Community Development Department. This is the consideration of the Professional Services Advisory Committee's recommendation to amend LDR regulations to provide permanent exceptions for LDRs and for individual development projects, pages 175 through 217 in your backup. Welcome, Mr. Keating.
Good morning. I'm Stan Bowling, County Planning Director, and I'll just be going through a little bit of background for this particular item. This is consideration of a Professional Services Advisory Committee recommendation. and it involves permanent exceptions concept. The context of this particular discussion item are several economic development, business-friendly initiatives that the board has been involved with, a whole set of them dealing with the development process. You all passed an emergency ordinance changing some of the posted security requirements. There have been some internal review procedures changed based on comments from the development community. You all approved a temporary suspension at the time of CO item. There's actually ongoing evaluation with some developer groups on some changes. And you all also considered a signed regulation change to determine that it wasn't needed, but there was a full evaluation. Today, with this discussion item, the board is to consider a concept of permanent exceptions and consider the PSAC's recommendation and decide whether or not to move forward with that concept through the LDR amendment process. So today is the concept, and if you want to move forward with it, go through the detailed LDR amendment process. The premise for this particular item, and actually a related one that preceded it, was the need for flexibility for development. And the temporary suspension ordinance that you all passed dealt with timing flexibility. At the time of CO or certificate of completion, allowing that to go forward, having the project CO'd, and then ensuring that there's full compliance within 90 days after that. And you all approved that in May. That is in effect. We've not had many CO requests since that, but that is in effect, and we're ready to use it. Today is what we described as the additional approach. We actually talked about this a little bit back in May when the temporary suspension ordinance was discussed. And the concept is to grant permanent exceptions to the regulations. So now we're talking about flexibility with the regulations themselves. And there's a couple of things I wanted to emphasize at this point. One of the real basic premises is that no ordinance is perfect. You can't foresee every development circumstance. And so the flexibility for the regulation itself is really the crux of this proposal. And there's also recognition that we already have flexibility built into several provisions, and this would go over and above what we have. And I just think it's worth kind of repeating what we already have in our process to have flexibility. One is the plan development process for all types of uses, and there's flexibility on a project-by-project basis for that. There are options in a lot of our ordinances right now. We try to structure some types of items with options. We do that with buffer widths and turnarounds as examples, different design options. We also have a variance process, and you all have in your backup some of the criteria for that. That's handled by the Board of Adjustment. We also have the LDR amendment process. In fact, what we're discussing right now is an example of flexibility in changing the regulations. So that's in place. And there's an appeal process to correct staff interpretation errors. And that goes, for the LDRs, goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then to you all, so you all ultimately can see those. The PSAC recommendation is to move forward with a formal land development regulation amendment whereby the Board of County Commissioners could grant a permanent exception to a regulation. Really two circumstances. And again, this is the concept so far. Where special conditions and circumstances exist that are not a result of the applicant's actions, the deviation that would be granted would not exceed 10%, and it would be the minimum necessary for development of the project. A second type of approach would be a permanent exception where an alternative is proposed that's functionally equivalent to the regulation that's in place. There would be no permanent exceptions for building heights, allowable uses, specific land use criteria such as the criteria we have for administrative permit or special exceptions. And what staff wanted to point out was we see some difficulties in trying to work out the details of the concept, and we explained this in the staff report, and I just wanted to highlight some of those right now. Defining and evaluating functional equivalency we feel would be difficult. And I wanted to use an example. Actually, this one's even a little simpler math even than the one that's in the agenda item, and not saying that this is one that would be proposed, but just to do the math. For example, we have an existing requirement now of roadway buffers, and let's just take a hypothetical site that requires 10 12-foot canopy trees along their stretch of roadway. If you multiply the number of feet of canopy trees involved, 120 feet. Would a functionally equivalent alternative be 6-foot canopy trees, 20 of them at 6 feet, getting the same 120 feet of canopy trees? And although quantitatively, you can make an argument that they're equivalent, but if you look at the actual function of it, and you look at a site like this US 1 site, where you've got 12-foot trees along the buffer here, you've actually got some 12-foot trees 50 feet back along the foundation planting. If you were to just take those in half and double the ones that you see there, that would be, quantitatively, that would be a functionally equivalent. It's the size of a 6-foot kind of standard. This is some some crepe myrtles along US 1 that are 6 feet high. Would that be functionally equivalent or not? And the reason we just wanted to bring up this example is kind of what it seems like you might wind up doing is kind of doing a full evaluation with every one of the functional equivalent and looking at the whole basis for that particular LDR amendment. It's almost like doing an LDR amendment evaluation. We see that as a difficulty on a case-by-case basis. Another issue that we wanted to identify was defining special conditions and circumstances. If it's defined broadly, then it would be difficult to be consistent application to application. And if you define it kind of narrowly the way the variance criteria define it, you're essentially kind of back to the variance process we already have in place. So you really wouldn't be coming up with anything different. Also, if the permanent exception concept is put into the LDRs, you would have a process kind of issue that could come into effect where an applicant can come to the Board of County Commissioners and essentially get a permanent exception for a design before it goes through the rest of the design review process. In other words, the board could grant a permanent exception for a project prior to the P&Z considering the project. So there could be, I just want to point out, there would be differences in some of the traditional flow and input you all get from your committees. There's also one other issue we want to point out, and that's going to involve LDR amendments one way or the other. And really, if the permanent exception concept does go through, what we foresee at staff level is after the fact LDR amendments. And I think the PSAC agreed with this, that we're going to wind up with LDR amendments one way or the other. We do it after we look at a specific case, or the other, which is staff's preference, is if we know we have problem issues, let's address them up front and look at the LDRs first based on the experiences we already have. So that's really kind of both sides of that issue. For alternatives, we outlined 3, and these are in your report. One is no action. The board could say, we've got the recommendation from the PSAC. We don't see a need to take action. Let's see how the temporary suspension works in terms of the flexibility that has. A second alternative would be to direct the PSAC and staff to kind of look at all the LDRs, or at least problem LDRs, kind of globally. Identify problem LDRs, propose solutions, and come back rather than wait for case by case. Go ahead. If we know we have some problem issues, let's go ahead and address them directly. The third alternative is this acting on the PSAC recommendation, which is direct staff to initiate the LDR amendment for board-granted permanent exceptions, and then come back through the process for that. Staff's recommendation, we prefer the first approach here, which is to direct the PSAC and staff to identify problem LDRs. We've kind of had just kind of some specific examples given in the discussion of this particular proposal. Come back and propose solutions. In other words, try to be direct of the problems that we think are out there now. The other alternative would be for you all to direct staff to initiate the LDR amendment as recommended by the PSAC and try to work out the details and address the difficulties that we've identified through the LDR amendment process. That's it in a nutshell. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you all might have.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yeah, I like the example of the permanent exception. One of the problems I have with this is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I think there'd be a propensity to come in and say, I can save X number of dollars because I can hit 10% under what the LDR is. That concerns me because I think that's going to happen. You've got people looking at the bottom line when they develop. And secondly is when this comes to whoever the board may be, we all have a different level of common sense and a different perspective to evaluate these things and have that flexibility. And therefore, I would like to see that that we identify the problem LDRs and that we correct them. And we've already got the opportunity to do a temporary for 90 days. And I think that gives the flexibility, gives them the CO, and we can move forward without starting to get things that we're doing in this county out here someplace in an area that is not definite. In fact, one of the things that I hear from developers particularly all the time is that, we're changing horses in the middle of the stream and so on and so forth, and I think that gives us the ability to do it. But with that being said, I'd like to make a motion that we accept staff's recommendation number one.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a public hearing?
Yeah,
I don't think so. It's a department matter.
No, I apologize. You're right.
Okay. Anyway, I make a motion, staff's recommendation number one, to direct the PSAC to staff and staff to identify the problem of the LDRs and develop proposed amendments to resolve the problems identified.
I understand your logic to a certain extent, Commissioner. My problem with that is what you're doing is unilaterally lowering the requirements for development countywide, and I'm not in favor of that. We've got some good landscape ordinance in place, and they work, and I like them. It's just some places, in some parts of the county, every ordinance does not fit properly, and we have no flexibility for that. And personally, I'm not in favor of lowering the requirements unilaterally across the county.
And Wesley, I would agree, except when you say there's certain parts of the county where they don't work unilaterally. But I would have to ask that by whose judgment? Your judgment may be different than mine. Peter's may be different than ours.
And that's a very good point, and that's why I don't want to make it so that just the chairman can make the decision.
Anyway, I guess the motion dies for lack of
Well, no, I'll second the motion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to ask this mainly to try to bring out the discussion because I haven't had enough experience with some of these LDRs and stuff. But on number 2, where an alternative design improvement is proposed that would provide a functionally equivalent, that seems like it might allow some more creativity and stuff. But I don't think we want to go overboard right off the bat. So what if we combine 1 and 2 and made it an and maybe even increase the 10% to 20%, but required that functional equivalent? And I'm not sure if that's a question for staff or a question for the...
You mean, was it 2 and 3 or 1 and 2?
1 and 2, no. Under the PSAC recommendations for special circumstances and conditions that warrant a limit deviation from quantitative. Now, if you just take that 1, that just lowers the standard.
Right.
Okay. But if you add and, then they have to come up with a functional equivalent, which in some difficult situations might allow for some more creativity, or in any circumstance may allow on the margin some creativity. So it doesn't or it shouldn't at the end lower any standards, but it allows for some creativity and perhaps for some of those more difficult projects for something else to be done. And that's I'm tossing that more for a question than anything at this point.
That's very creative, and that's probably perhaps a step in finding some common ground here. So the concern that really I have about if you just make it as number 1, you're taking away the ability for a businessman in the community to be a little bit more nimble on their feet in these trying economic times or any economic times. And because what you're doing then is you're saying, hey, this doesn't work. Well, I'm sorry, it's our LDR, so I don't know what we can do about it. That's typically where it stops. What this would give them the opportunity to is for staff to say, you know what, I see what you're talking about, and instead of it taking, a 90-day process to amend an LDR, it gives our staff some opportunity to work with with the businessmen in the community to be just a little more nimble on their feet, to be able to have a little bit, that, like Penny said, a little bit more business friendly in the community without lowering the standards 100%. I like what you're saying there, Commissioner Slory.
I'm concerned about lowering the standards across the board, and I am also looking at number 1 and number 2 as a possibility to address this. I'd like to remove no action out of number 1 because we're already starting with a negative. We need to go positive and we need to go forward, whereas we're not making permanent LDR changes at this time, and we want to allow for the opportunity for the recently adopted temporary suspension ordinance providing sufficient flexibility to address the concerns, and then that process is also likely to involve the reevaluation of certain landscaping process and requirements, and I believe that staff can look at them to evaluate them at the same time. So we would not be taking no action. So that's what I would like to see done, is where we would take the removal of no action out of number 1 and insert the second sentence in number 2 and direct staff to look at the landscaping ordinances and requirements, as most of the objections and the hurdles have been landscaping. It was not about signage. It's not. It's very limited about signage or striping or offsets. It's basically around landscaping. So I think we have to focus in on the landscaping. So I'd like to make a motion.
So, well, did that be combined 1 and 2? Or
Combined
2 and 3? That was
no.
We have a motion on
I
the
know.
floor.
We're going to give me just a minute.
No,
I'm just wondering what
that motion died, correct?
No, we got a second over here.
That did.
Yeah.
All right, then.
Look, but I just want to make sure. I want to ask you what you were suggesting
Yeah, for
was
that
what
motion.
Commissioner Solari suggested, combining 2 and 3.
Yes, I'd like to take no action out of number 1. No, it's number 1 and number 2.
Well, be careful, you're mixing up the alternatives and the recommendations. The recommendation is for number 2 or 3, not number 1.
Not.
If you look at page 178.
That's correct.
There's 3 alternatives, but the recommendations don't include no action.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Wheeler.
Yeah, just, again, Wesley, if I'm wrong here, correct me, I'm sure you will.
Yeah. No, 3 and 2.
This all started a few months ago with a common sense approach. We came up with a 90-day temporary solution to help people get over a hurdle to get their CEO to get into business. Now that common sense has moved into a permanent move, and it's also suggested that we go from 10 to 20%. And I just want to make sure that this kind of a slippery slope. I think the original, and again, our common senses aren't all the same. And the original 90 days, I think, makes sense. You talked about a tree that's 6 inches low, you put a little fertilizer on it, in 90 days you got your 6 inches and we're all happy. We're talking about a whole new program here. And I think we're opening up a door that has potential to just keep going in that direction and lowering our standards.
Well, Commissioner, that's what you wanted to do on the first one, in my opinion, by going back and readdressing them all. I know whenever somebody's trying to game the system, common sense does not scare me. I understand whenever something comes before me, being in small business, for example, exactly what Mr. Foster just laid out. Whenever he was here in front of us, that was common sense. It wasn't somebody trying to game the system, and it's a little bit of a different scenario, but that is a situation where we had a development order that we decided that we had an issue with it in other places, try to impose it on that, and it didn't work. And so I really feel like that the proper way to move forward with this would be I don't mind us going back and readdressing some of them to a certain extent, but we have a very good landscape ordinance. I do not want to lower that unilaterally. What I do want to do is I want to make it so that somebody, for example, like I'll just use the Hess station up there on 41st Street in US 1. They've got some magnificent big oak trees right there in front. But there's a scenario where they're starting to grow into the signs where the only time I can look at it's like that when I go by to see what the price of fuel is. I think that's almost a hazard of some kind. And I'd like to see some kind of common sense sprinkled into this, so we're not just unilaterally reducing it to the point that we're doing away with it to the point that we're not happy.
Well, I think they can trim the trees. Maybe you can't cut them, you can trim them.
You can trim them back. There's no doubt about that.
So we all have the same common sense. You'd agree with me all the time.
No, sir. The reason is the other trees are growing so big that you can trim all you want out of that other one, but if you remove that one that's in front of the sign, then you're in violation of our sign ordinance and all that. Then they're required to go back in there, or not our sign ordinance, our landscape ordinance, and they're required to go back in there and replace the tree that they just now, as the canopy has matured, doesn't fit the site. And we're going to have another problem with that. If you have the opportunity to go out and see Point West building out there, I have never seen a thicker stretch of woods in Mother Nature, much less in the area between the medical building and, is that Point West Drive?
Yes. Then address that with the LDRs.
But everywhere else along State Road 60, our landscape development, our LDRs look good with the corridor and everything. I don't want to unilaterally reduce it there. It would just be the opportunity to sprinkle some common sense, and if you haven't had a chance, for me to give you that real live example, or for you to see it yourself, it might not do justice, but I just really feel like that to have some ability for us to do some permanent waivers here, just in my mind, it's screaming common sense, and I don't know where
the ordinances and LDRs, if they're permanent, and
yes,
left up to the common sense of 5 elected officials.
And some of them I really agree with, and some of them I don't.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah. I would debate with you the fact that once you grant an exemption, you have unilaterally changed our LDRs. Because once you give one person an exemption, the next guy is going to want it. And if you deny him, then it's going to get all lawyered up, and we're going to be in a lawsuit because you gave this other guy the exemption. I had the same reason, and you're denying me. So once we grant an exemption, we have unilaterally lowered our LDRs. The other point is that a lot of these issues of the landscape ordinance, we had a lot of qualified people spend a lot of time going in and developing that revised landscape ordinance. And if there are problems with it, I think we ought to do the same thing, have that group come back, spend the time, the expertise, and look at it and say, we thought 12-foot oak trees was a good idea. We find out that nobody in the county sells a 12-foot oak tree. They only sell 11-foot. Then common sense would say, yes, we should amend the LDR to say it's 11-foot, and that's that, based on information and research and not just flinging something by the seat of our pants here. And then finally, I'd like to remind this board that 4 of the 5 of us established county policy a year ago when the Ocean Concrete appeal came up, and you all voted to adopt the bright line that no, there is no wiggle room. If we have a law that says an appeal has to be submitted in 21 days and the check has to be good on the 21st day, and doesn't matter if that check was good on the 22nd day, you guys voted no exceptions to our rules and regulations. So I think to be consistent with the policy that was established is we have LDRs. We've put in a 90-day to give it as much flexibility, but if it's a bad LDR, we need to change the LDR and not be flying by the seat of our pants every time somebody comes in with a good story. So I think that we ought to do this in a professional manner, which is to go back to the landscape committee and have them look at things, find out where the problems are, and make good, solid recommendations to correct. And I'll give you 2 good examples. I know in some grocery store parking lots, when you're leaving, that shrub to your left is like 4 feet high, and it blocks the view of incoming traffic. I think that's something we clearly need to change, because to me that's a bad requirement, because you can't see the oncoming traffic in the left-hand lane there. I think another thing we need to look at just came up with the Huntington Place. If we're requiring a berm here and a raised road there, and that's creating a problem of flooding for a landowner, we ought to look at that and say, well, we're requiring 2 things, and the net result is a bad thing for the lot owner. That's something we ought to look at and correct in our LDRs.
Now, that's some good common sense.
Yeah,
and I agree with you.
So I support the motion that we have staff go back and look at where these problem LDRs, and then we go through our LDR process and change them, and not just based on a good story.
And I appreciate what you're saying, but where this falls short on the common sense side of it is that everything that had to happen on that berm, or that's instance today with Mr. Foster, was after several months of staff saying no, 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 no. Why? Because it says so. There was no way of him saying, is there any way of getting some business-friendly relief here? And the answer was no, 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 because common sense said, and eventually he said, well, I've got to have something, and what can you do? We'll come to the county commission. Well, that's really all I want to do, is to give them some opportunity to be a little more swift on their feet and let them come before us. And if that is that 4-foot high, or that where you can't see, Commissioner, if they were to cut that down and remove that so that you could see it, that would in fact probably be a violation of our ordinance, because you've got to have so much of a buffer every number of feet. Well, I don't want to waive that, because you're going to find somebody game the system there, that just because that one was in the line of sight, they're going to be able to remove a whole bunch more and put up, a spindly thicket of some kind for landscape ordinance.
But you only cut 10% of it down, though. You couldn't take it all off.
Well, and if we move forward with it, exactly, that could be the 10%. You made my point there, Commissioner.
I know.
Well, I think just because we look at our LDRs does not mean we're giving them up completely.
No.
I think we're going to have a group professionally look at it and come up with good, solid recommendations to correct deficiencies.
Well, and I appreciate that, and the group that we've had look at it, they're sitting out here through our PSAC. Those are the ones that are in the industry, and they're dying to say something. So if we could, I'll go ahead and open this up to the public here shortly. Yes?
I just want to ask Bob one question. I like the idea to some extent of the functionally equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay, well, can we build that into the LDRs? Because there's no lowering standard. I mean, there's some places where you have a line of trees, and they don't add much of anything. But you can have the same number. There might be a site where you can have the same number of trees, but you stack them a little bit different on the land, and it gives you maybe the look of a old Florida hammock or something like that. which is, in my mind, better than a line. So nobody's getting out of anything. They're just hopefully using a little creativity to build something that's a little better and a better match for their site and a better match for the neighborhood. So you're not lowering any standards. It's not as somebody coming and saying, listen, if I cut this 10%, I'm going to save 10%. It's saying, we don't want these trees right at the exit, like Commissioner O'Brien just said, but maybe we put another row somewhere else, which builds up some more trees internally on the site or something like that.
Well, I mean, and everything you're talking about is good. There's just so many moving parts on it that quite often, until you get it put in, then you look at it and you say, this is not working. But it's the code,
well,
so
that's
you've
why
got
you
to
have
do
the
it.
functional equivalent in the code, which, again, allows for some creativity, but doesn't allow them to reduce the standard.
As far as the
and again, that's the question. I don't deal with them like Bob does. It sounds good to me from up here. I'm just not sure how it would work practically.
Actually, there is some flexibility in the landscape code about where you actually place material. The problem with functional equivalent, the problem we find in trying to actually define it, is most of our regulations are quantitative. We've got X number of trees, they have to be X high. You've got X number per linear feet, although they don't have to be exactly like that.
I got two
Functionally
examples.
equivalent is really a qualitative standard. Is the alternative equal to or about the same as the regulation? So the big problem with functional equivalent is it requires a judgment. It's a qualitative standard.
I would feel good after I said that, so I'm not going to say it.
But Bob, you have two fine recent examples of this type of challenge of functional equivalent. There's a auto dealership that's on State Road 60 that I believe that the trees were to diffuse the light, but you can't see the sign. And we've asked that business to come forward and partner in the community. It's very, very confusing. The other one is it's very difficult to go down Oslo and find the Talmadges that opened up the Ace Hardware. If you're going in the wrong direction, you cannot read the sign. The sign is there, and there's also trees and shrubbery. And I believe that we might have missed the boat in the opportunity to bring them forward to give them the advantage as well. Those are just two examples, and they're on different parts of the county that we're having a challenge with. And there's someone else who has a project in North County, in Commissioner Davis's district, that the trees are the big obstacle at this point. And I think we need a wider sense of acceptability. And if that's what you want to bring into function equivalency, that's the direction I think we need to go in.
If I could just I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can I make a comment
Yes.
on that? I think, just to speak to both those examples, I think something that's happening at this time is that we're starting to see projects come in under the new landscape requirements.
Right.
A lot of them that you see out on State Road 60 were not under the new landscaping requirements. And the samples cited, I think what we're starting to see is a pattern in some of the narrower buffers, some of the quantities of canopy trees might actually crowd some of the trees. And so, as I'm starting to see a pattern, and I think a lot of the examples that keep coming up are actually pretty narrow part of the landscape code. And again, that's why staff feels comfortable with the recommendation on looking at the problem LDRs. I actually see connections between the examples that keep being brought up. And that's why we felt comfortable with the recommendation we had.
And I'm not suggesting to weakening them as much as, look, you all do this every day. You see the challenges. You see the obstacles. Not allow the tail to wag the dog. You all need to wag it and make it right. And I believe in those two examples, there might have been some tweaking that we could have brought them to the forefront and possibly helped the businesses a little better. I know that there were some challenges, and they have their monument signs and their advertising, and hopefully they're doing well. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit less challenge for them as it was going forward. I know that you had to work many hours on those two alone.
Mr. Robinson, thank you.
That's it. Hi, I'm Pete Robinson again, 315 Grapefruit Road, Vero Beach, Florida. And I'm on the PSAC. So basically, The problem that you have here is this. You write an LDR, and I don't care, we can go back and write those LDRs 32 times, and we're still going to screw up because there's going to be some example that's going to come in that nobody in his right mind ever thought about. And the way the system works, you can say to the guy, okay, we got to go through all these different steps before you can get up here. And all we're doing is saying, go to the county commission, tell them what you want to do, and if they say it's okay, then you can go ahead with your whole system. Now, let me give you an example of where this really worked. You talk about, he talked about, well, I hate to give permanent exceptions. Right, Gary?
Right.
I don't like to give permanent exceptions.
Well, not in all cases.
Were you on the board? Were you on the board back when the outlet mall was built? Weren't you on the board back then in that one, or had you already gone on to sheriff?
I
can't remember.
I can't remember.
Okay. Well, back in
is it good or bad? I'll tell you what I was on.
Back in the old days, in the standard building code, that's when they created the Building Board of Appeals. And Esther Reimer would use the Building Board of Appeals to come in, and it was the same thing. If we could come up with something that was functionally equivalent, it would go to the Building Board of Appeals, we'd hear it, and we'd say, okay, that's okay, you can do it. When they were doing the outlet mall, they came in, and one of the requirements in the building code was that you had to have a John in every store. And they came in and they said, oh no, we got these Johns that are outside, and we've got them with each building, and everybody can use them. And we said, hey, we're just a appointed board. The code says very specifically, you can't do that. Now, the way that ordinance is written, it gets appealed to the county commission. Do you know how long it took the county commission to change that rule?
Oh my gosh.
And have you heard any complaints about the Johns out there at the outlet mall? Personally, I think they're great. I much prefer where they are than having to hike through the back of a store every time. But these are the type of things that happen. The ordinance gets written one way, and you don't even think about these things, and there you got a permanent exception. And I think the permanent exception beats the heck out of the old building code.
Peter, you'd only be able to eliminate 10% of them, though.
And I think, and let's be honest, Stan gives this example of people coming in wanting to cut the trees at 6 feet. They're not going to come in with that.
No, you must work in the real world. Is that what you do?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Okay. But they're going to come in and they're going to ask for something that really means something and makes it better, because the only reason you're asking for an exception is to make the product better. If it doesn't make it better, hell, just build the damn LDR. No big deal. That's what we all do. That's how it works.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Appreciate it. Anyone else wish to speak? Welcome, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Charlie Wilson, 1057 6th Avenue, Vero Beach. Thank you, commissioners and staff, for all the hard work, and PSAC particularly for all. They've heard this 3 times. And I think the 3 times they've asked that we go in the direction that we're still trying to go. Mr. Thorpe, Mr. Robinson, Ms. Chandler, Mr. Foster, Mr. Jarvis have all been up here trying to explain to us that we have a problem. I think the first step in addiction is to identify that you have a problem. And I've been working very hard to try and solve what our biggest problem is, and that is unemployment. Unemployment in Indian River County is higher and will be higher than ever in its history. And one of the reasons that we have unemployment, in my opinion, is because it's very difficult for small businesses to operate and start in Indian River County. And that's what is fueling all this activity. This is just the latest in the step. This proposal is just the latest in a number of steps that are trying to drag us into being a business-friendly community. Because we may act like we are, but we are not a business-friendly community. There are a number of safeguards that are written into this proposal, and you saw them in the staff's proposal. It's difficult for a citizen, and I'm not representing anybody, I'm just trying to work on this. It's difficult for a citizen to come in. This is a good example, because y'all went through a half an hour where you were talking about the staff report, and yet you have no alternative. You talked about emotion, and you talked to each other, but you have not even considered the alternative view. Occasionally, we perhaps should have an opposing view make a presentation before we start making the questions to the staff based upon their recommendations, because they get to write the recommendations and then you all start talking about it. It's sort of like misdirection over here, because one of the things y'all are talking about is you've already bought into the fact that this is just about the landscape ordinance. This is not just about the landscape ordinance. This has to do with signs. This has to do with traffic. This has to do with landscape. This has to do with common sense. We saw this earlier on the agenda today. Because one barren piece of land has to have no trees on it, then all pieces of land must have no trees and be barren deserts. And that's what we're facing. That's not the way it should be done. Commissioner Solari is exactly right. If we make it both unique, functionally equivalent to be able to solve the problem, and some numerical value. The PSAC didn't come up with a numerical value. The staff came up with a numerical value. They're the ones that said you have to have a numerical value. So the functional equivalent is a great example, because in the building codes you do have a functional equivalent, and that's because they recognize that, you know what, we may not know every single combination of every single thing in every single project in every single location in the county. And if you can come up with a better idea, then you should be able to use it for the good and welfare of the residents that live here. And one of the great examples is by Chuck Meckling, and I hope he'll come up and tell you about it, where he had a difficulty between palm trees. This is not simply about how we're going to change the landscape ordinance. It's a much bigger question than that. The intent was, the original intent before we got to all the staff reports and was to find a way, and we had a separate board that we wanted, and this commission decided that they wanted to do it themselves, to hear and decide appeals where it is alleged there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by an administrative official in the enforcement of an ordinance, to interpret regulations at the request of zoning enforcement officials, and to grant variances, to receive and consider appeals for the granting of variances from the terms of this ordinances, and to grant such variances as will not be contrary to the public interest, where owing to special conditions or literal enforcement of the provisions of an ordinance will cause significant hardship. What's wrong with that?
That sounds like one of our ordinances, though.
It was the Board of Adjustments that y'all decided you didn't want to use, but you still need to use the same. So my recommendation, what I'd like to see, is 1 and 2. Is that you combine them together and say, I want you to look at the LDRs, and I want to go forward with the ability of the county commission to use common sense when it's brought before them. So it's not one, the not having anything, not doing anything is absolutely not an option. Now, I don't want to typically
take no action.
I don't want to go through that. I've gone through the staff recommendations you have, and we've made notes all the way along it. And if we had a different process where when we had an issue like this where staff got to make some recommendations, and then somebody who may want to do a presentation that may have a different view of the staff's report be able to make a recommendation before you guys start making motions, would be helpful, because I have complete disagreement. Not complete disagreement. I have a number of disagreements in this staff recommendation that I won't bother to bore all of you with, because most of the decisions have already been made. But the main things, let me just get to the summary. The main things are, staff is concerned about the process. I understand staff is concerned about the process, and I understand we have to have a process. But as Commissioner Wheeler said, 10%, the rules are made for 10%. We're making these rules for 10% of the people, and we're punishing 90% of the people.
Okay.
When Commissioner O'Brien very correctly says we need to follow the process, that's what we're doing. We're trying to put a process in place for us to follow. And there is an alternative. When you're looking at these, like they said, the example of we're going to put in double the number of half-size trees, y'all are going to look at that. That's not a functional equivalent. All you have to, and what's different about that, if one person lawyers up, location. The location makes differences for all kinds of reasons. Now, just as a note, because what we're trying to do here is, as Commissioner Davis very ably said, we want the highest standards We love living in Indian River County. Jen Stripson, sitting out there, worked many hours doing a landscape ordinance. Is it better to have a higher standard with a few exceptions, or a low standard because you can't make any exceptions? The best way is to have a high standard allowing unique exceptions with all of the safeguards we have here. Now, just one last thing I want to point out to you is I stayed up last night till very late. You can see I've had too much coffee this morning. I stayed out till very late last night and I did some research. In April of 2001, Indian River County was the 42nd highest unemployment in the state. Pretty good. Bottom third. By 2002, we were 6th. By 2003, we were 5th. We are now 4th. We are tied for 4th highest unemployment. We have chronically been in the top 10 counties for unemployment for 10 years. We fell off the wagon sometime in 2001. I don't know what happened in 2001, but something happened. The only other county to be consistently higher than we are is Flagler County. I can't find what the coalition is between Flagler County and Indian River County other than Nate McCollum. Maybe it's Nate McCollum's fault. I don't know. I haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. But there's another county. That's Liberty County. Liberty County went from 13th highest unemployment to last. They are now the lowest unemployment in the state of Florida. They are at 4.4%. So what did they do? One of the things that they did was they attracted education, and they took a business-friendly, small business attitude. And the thousands, there are 7,800 people unemployed in Indian River County right now. So one of the things that they're not looking for you to do is do nothing. So there's lots more information that I won't bore you with it all. I urge you to do the recommendations 1 and 2. And let's get on with it.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Anybody else wish to speak?
One question?
Yes.
What's the population of Liberty County?
Google it.
I have a more important question than that, Commissioner.
Well, it's important to me.
Okay.
No, but to actually give you, because being the great magician that you are,
quickly, that is way off topic.
Somewhere else. When I did look at the unemployment, there were 5 counties that consistently were there, and 4 of those 5 counties were all about the same size, about 160 to 200,000 people. They're all about the same size. They were all bedroom communities. Liberty County is much smaller than that.
So you don't know what their population is?
I don't know the population of all 67 counties in the state.
No, just the one you mentioned.
All right, let me pull this back on topic. Because thank you very much. Wait, I think there's one more question.
Before we go, I want to clarify this maybe just semantics, but I want to clarify what you said. When you said PSAC 1 and 2, were you referring to the alternatives 1, 2, and 3, or were you referring to the PSAC recommendations where there's 1 with special circumstances and conditions that warrant blah, blah, blah?
Neither.
And 2, where an alternative designer.
The two items are, Commissioner Solari, is first of all, your idea of
under staff recommendation
is spectacular. It should be both of those things. I agree with you.
Okay, so staff recommendation.
But the staff recommendation, I'm saying that you should do both 1 and 2, where you identify the problem LDRs and you put in a function that allows businesses to appeal to a higher.
Fine, thank you. Okay, is there any further discussion? Any public discussion on this? We have a motion on the floor. Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Carmen, welcome.
Liberty County, 7,700 population.
And that was my point. You might be looking at the population of cattle and trees in Liberty County, because that's truly how they've made their change.
Listen, y'all, and I appreciate the debate about Liberty County, but Mr. Carmen, you have the floor. Welcome.
Yes, for the record, Brian Carmen, Indian River Neighborhood Association. I listen to a lot of this debate. If anybody here thinks that changing these regulations is going to take our unemployment down to virtual employment, you're wrong. Multiply by 10 is not going to do it. Our unemployment problem is not a result of these LDRs. So let's move that out of the way. It's not an issue. Number 2, a month ago, this body set up a temporary CO arrangement. And the hysteria I heard in the PSAC and in this room was there's people chomping at the bit to get this, and businesses are being held up. Moving vans are sitting next to houses, but people won't let them move in. I checked 1 month. Mr. Katie, how many people have applied for this temporary license, temporary CO?
It's been in effect about 3 weeks and no one has applied.
No one, thank you. We haven't even seen a result of the temporary, yet we're pell-mell running in to take something permanent. And if we look at this, and a couple of things bother me here. One, the difficulty to maintain consistency from application to application. Difficult to maintain fairness and predictability. And this might apply to other similarly situated properties. Commissioners, I believe if you let this go through, the camel's nose is definitely under the tent. And I don't think you can stop it once it gets going, because you're going to be caught in one of these fairness issues. And I don't believe it's going to work. And I think we're driving beyond our headlights. I sincerely do. And for this matter, I wish you would understand that to take these matters is not to take them lightly or to take them quickly. I know you all understand that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Carmen. Mr. Paladin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joseph Paladin, President of Black Swan Consulting. Quickly, the Landscaping Committee and the 926 ordinance, they actually worked 4 years on putting that together before it came forward, so a lot of thought went into that. And the only point I want to make in saying that, a lot of the things that you might do on the fly, you might do at a very quick moment, are some of the things that were actually made mistakes on and had problems with. And I'm responsible for some of those mistakes, by the way, and bringing them forward and not seeing the problems until we run them forward. Like 25-foot buffers against each other in 2 subdivisions. We thought that was a good idea. We didn't think about how we were going to maintain the spacing between the 2 buffers. So that became a problem. The intention was good, but the outcome was bad. So I think that anything we do, rules are made to be followed, not broken. I think we need to go through the system and look at the LDRs like we suggested and take time to change the things we're going to change, because many of these things that we're talking about haven't even been used yet. A lot of the 926 we haven't even used yet. So I hate to see us change some LDRs without us first seeing what the problems are and studying those problems and bringing them before you all. And I would like to ask Commissioner Wheeler, what was the motion on the floor?
Number 2.
Number one.
Number one.
Number one, staff's recommendation, and that's to look at our LDRs and find out where we have problems and fix them.
And the combination side of it would be to allow for permanent exceptions.
Before you brought them forward and studied them, or after, Mr. Clark?
That wasn't part of my motion.
It wasn't part of his motion. I'm just saying the 2 different thoughts on the floor right now would allow, and I really see that in the event that we have one come forward for an exception, it wouldn't be long after that it would in fact be an LDR change that makes sense, because we see a flaw in our LDR. The problem is what we're doing is we're putting the burden directly on the individual or the businessman to come for us and tell us that we need some common sense in this ordinance. The other way around, we're giving them the opportunity to bypass the whole bureaucratic mess and come straight to us and say, in the real world, this is what this means. Can you help me in my small business?
Okay, and then the only problem I have with that sounds like common sense at its best. But like Commissioner O'Brien brought forward, if we do that, then aren't we making an exception to where we set the standard for other developers to come by and use that same exception as a new standard? How do you avoid that?
You avoid that by on a case-by-case basis, Mr. Paladin. For example, that little narrow tract of property that just came before us, there's not probably another one of those in the county anywhere. And there might be somewhere in there where an ordinance quite possibly doesn't fit in that isosceles right triangle right there on In River Drive. And so to have the opportunity to get some flexibility for an individual like that, to me, in my mind, it's just screaming common sense.
I think we need to review the LDR and make sure we don't make a second mistake, because for every action you take, you got to realize there's going to be a reaction to it. I think that what you said is good. What Commissioner Solari said makes sense, but I still agree with Commissioner O'Brien that we're setting a standard and it would be easier for other people to come by and take advantage of that. I'd like to see us go, if we make an exception, I'd like to go back and study the LDR with staff and bring that LDR back to see
I would agree
where
with
that
that.
could be changed and used.
Yeah,
I think we need to be very careful about making quick changes when we've taken so long to bring the changes forward that we're now trying to enforce.
Yeah.
Does not that just codify what we said earlier about looking at the alternatives of item number 1 and 2 as opposed to recommendation 1 and 2? If you look at alternatives 1 and 2, make no LDR changes at this time. Instead, wait for to see the recently adopted temporary suspension ordinance. We've only given it just 3 weeks, and to see if the ordinance provides sufficient flexibility to address the concerns, and couple that with 2, which would be to direct PSAC and staff to identify problem LDRs and develop proposed amendments to resolve the problems identified, and that could be in the future. Again, allowing the dog to wag the tail and not the tail to wag the dog.
Well, getting beyond the dog, I think you're confusing 2 issues.
No.
I think that what we brought forward last month was a exception for time, was a 90-day extension for the developer to come forward and meet that LDR or meet that standard. What we're talking about now is entirely different. It has nothing to do with that. So, it just doesn't apply.
Mr. Chairman.
But we haven't given the temporary suspension ordinance a chance to see. Well, it's only 3 weeks old.
You can give the temporary extension 30 years. It's still not going to change anything.
Right.
This is different.
And the main difference is one of them is just a temporary, and what we're talking about here is actually a permanent variance of it because of a specific situation. Yes.
Yeah, the one thing, and I'd like input from staff before I completely bought into that, but I do like what Commissioner Solari said about the equivalent,
Functional equivalent.
Functional equivalent. And because it would give staff some direction. I mean, maybe you're a parking lot, you don't have enough in your parking lot over on one side to have a parking space, but someplace else you could, in other words, not lower our standards, but have a little flexibility to move them around within a site to come up with something that's workable. And I would feel more comfortable with the, staff's input on that before I would agree with that, to look at the pros and the cons. But on the surface, it makes sense.
So, Mr. Chairman, how about we take a vote on the first issue, and then I'll frame a motion for the second?
Okay. All right. Well, all those in favor of staff recommendation number 1, which is to just identify the problem LDRs and amendments to resolve, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Nay.
And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to...
Wait, that passed.
Yeah. Now I'd like to make another motion.
Okay.
4-1, Mr. Chairman?
That was
4-1.
4-1, yes.
And my motion is to direct staff to initiate the formal LDL amendment process to develop a permanent exception ordinance that builds on the PSAC's recommendations, but doesn't look at PSAC recommendations 1 and 2 alternately, but looks at them as a combination of 1 and 2, and try to frame something that will be workable. And I believe that answers the qualitative question. Mr. Wheeler.
I want to make sure I want to understand. Are you saying, for instance, when you say number 2, it's got permanent exceptions, you're talking about having the ability to make a permanent?
No, 1 and 2 on page 176 and 1 page 77, where special circumstances and conditions that warrant a limited deviation from quantitative LDRs, but where a functionally equivalent solution is found. So you're not lowering any standard by 10% or some...
You're looking at having staff look at that in depth. I mean, I'm sorry, what's your motion again?
To have staff initiate the formal LDL amendment process to develop a permanent exception ordinance that builds on the PSAC's recommendations 1 and 2. Not 1 or 2.
Well, I got a problem with the 10% in there.
No, but that's what the functional equivalent is. If you reduce, say it's using their example of 100 canopy trees, it's not reducing that 10% so it's 90 trees. It's reducing it perhaps to 90 trees plus some other functional equivalent. whether it's more
I mean,
trees in a different
I was-
spot, or it's different heights, or maybe it's 5 20-foot trees, something like that.
I would second that for staff to bring that back.
Exactly, and that's what we'd
Yeah,
like to see.
yeah. Yeah, because I think that has some merit, but I'd like to really have a chance to look at it and digest
Exactly what
it.
I'd like to see too, because I'd like to have more discussion on it, because I'm not quite sure, but I think it's
I'll second
in addition, which may allow creativity and some originality and take care of some of those problem spaces without opening the door. And it also addresses Commissioner O'Brien's well brought out problem of an exception. You're not making an exception which lowers standards. They have to have something in there which addresses it in a more positive way.
I thought when you read your motion, you said that to develop an ordinance that included permanent exceptions.
Yes.
I think, isn't it what we really want to do is have staff look at the PSAC 1 and 2 recommendation when they amend the problem LDRs, to take that into account?
No, because if you don't allow for the permanent exception, there's no way you can do a functionally equivalent.
Unless you build it into the LDR.
Well, but you still have to have an exception to the LDR, and to be able to.
I think when you rewrite the LDR, you incorporate the qualitative things we're talking about, which is your functional equivalent. Okay, so instead of saying the oak trees have to be 12 foot high, that's quantitative, that's a number. The LDR would say you must provide a tree buffer that provides X amount of shade or X amount of coverage, canopy, things like that. And that is your functional equivalent built into the LDR.
And the problem is, and I think that Charlie Wilson summed this up best, is we're focusing this directly back on the landscape ordinance whenever really there's more broader applications for a functionally equivalent modification to the LDR that should be in place and that should be allowed.
If I can go back to that example about the toilets, okay? The county commission decided that was functionally equivalent the way they put them in. That's your decision whether it's functionally equivalent. You could have the same thing that he just talked about. You could have 5 or 6 trees already existing that are great big trees that everybody wants to preserve, and in order to preserve them, they've got to design their other trees some other way. It doesn't quite fit in a nice little row and all the way we look at, we look at, when you write your LDRs, you look at everything being cleared off and then everything being put back in.
See, when we put functional equivalent in there, it sets a standard.
Right.
Yes.
It's not just a 10% across, that's why.
Exactly.
But I'd like to see what staff brings back and look at it in depth and have a
That's what we're
public
saying.
hearing
You
on
can
it
look
and
at it
get
and then
input.
decide, but it's got to be functionally equivalent. And, it's just like, the toilets. You can have the toilets sitting in every store, or you can have the toilets around the corner and everybody can go there. And I think having around the corner works actually better than having them in every store. But that's your decision that you make on common sense. The law doesn't recognize it.
At all. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll leave my motion as it was.
Okay, and Jens, you have something you want to add? Okay. All right. We have a motion on the floor that to allow for permanent variances based on PSAC's recommendation, where special circumstances and conditions are warranted, and the functionally equivalent.
I don't think that's quite it.
It's not it? Yeah. What did I miss?
Well, the direction was to give direction to staff to come back with an LDR.
Yes.
Yes.
Does that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But I just want to make sure we got it takes away the 10% that you were so worried about and makes the functionally equivalent in there to give some flexibility and allows that flexibility to be permanent. And no further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1 with this time Commissioner O'Brien dissenting. It's not that bad being on the outside every now and then.
I know.
Okay.
Even Gary won one today, so who knows?
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioners. And thank you very much to our PSAC as well as staff. I know this is outside the box thinking to have some common sense in something that is supposed to be a black or white. But I appreciate y'all's time in getting what we have here from PSAC to be able to try to put together a really good ordinance. Thank you.
PSAC will come to toilets.
What's that?
Oh, he will.
Okay. And now that will move us to county attorney matters. We've had one already taken care of. B.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, a few weeks ago I had a conference call with the Florida Association of County Attorneys and their General Counsel, and there was some discussion in particular about 2 new laws that passed through the legislature this year. No decision has been made yet as to what the recommendation to the Florida Association of Counties will be, but that association is meeting, I believe, within the week
tomorrow
to give some guidance. And the General Counsel is seeking some degree of whether counties would be interested in challenging two particular laws that were passed. One had to do with impact fees, and the reasons for challenging the impact fee law includes that it changes the burden of proof. Currently, legislation passed by local governments is presumptively valid if it has some rational relationship to a legitimate public purpose. This changes the burden of proof so that any impact fee ordinance is not presumed to be valid, but would have to be demonstrated by a preponderance of the evidence in court that it is a valid ordinance. And there's the second reason that was put up. Because this will have the anticipated effect of reducing the authority that local governments have to raise revenues, it's required to be passed by a 2/3 vote of the membership of both houses, and that didn't occur. So there are some reasons why this could be challenged. The options that FAC is looking at is to seek a declaratory action that it's unconstitutional, it's violating a separation of powers between the legislature and the judiciary, and that it's void because it didn't achieve that 2/3 vote in the Senate. The second alternative is to wait until it's challenged and then to raise some of these issues in a defensive posture. Third option is wait till the next legislative session to see if there's any amendments. There's a second bill, but I'd rather have you address one at a time.
You're laying out a lot of information here, and we're going to have a good opportunity probably to have some sessions on this and to be able to discuss it in the legislative platform with fellow commissioners from around the state. And so, my position on this right now is I don't know, but I'll have the opportunity this week to figure it out.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would like to make a motion that we join them in the suit. Most of us have been to these sessions, and the Florida Association of Counties generally looks out for local home rule. There's many violations, in my opinion, of the Constitution, not only the state level, but the federal level. And I think that it's time that people start standing up and saying this is wrong. And I could cite probably 10 with little effort over the years that the state has handed down mandates to the counties and the cities with no funding, which is unconstitutional. And I think that if we don't stand our ground now, we're only going to lose more and more ability to have local rule for every county.
Second. You want to cap that at $100,000, or where would you like to, or just leave it at blank?
Well, they're not requesting any funding participation. They're really just looking to see if you'd like to be named as a plaintiff. They think that there may be interest from the Florida Municipal League or the school boards who are also affected by this impact fee legislation. They're not really looking for money. They're just looking, would you be interested in being a named plaintiff?
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion?
Just one more thing. We need to stand together in this, as counties across the state, to look out for our interests. So.
Okay, any further? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion passes 4-1 with me dissenting. Okay.
The second bill is Senate Bill 216, which is called the Local Government Campaign Finance Act. And they're concerned about this bill because it really restricts the abilities of local governments to get information out on anything that's of interest. To give you a couple of examples, a few years ago there was a big controversy about funding the statewide court system, and there was an amendment to Article 7 of the state constitution to clarify that it was the state's responsibility to fund the court system. The county's responsibility is to provide the buildings and facilities for the judiciary, but the state is to fund the system. And there's some concern that this bill would preclude expenditure of any funds on any political advertisement or communication media, which would include direct mailing, internet information by local governments, and maybe preclude those types of efforts in the future. There's also some concern that it might even prohibit counties from joining organizations such as the Florida Association of Counties, because a portion of the membership dues might be allocated to lobbying interests such as sending a veto letter to the governor or direct mailing. The Act does allow for communications which are limited to factual information, but how do you determine what's factual and what's opinion? As an example, if there was an economic development tax referendum to reduce ad valorem taxes for economic development, and the Office of Management and Budget did a projection as far as what would be the tax consequences of such an amendment to passing a referendum, is that projection a fact or an opinion? We don't know. And there's also a First Amendment issue. The United States Supreme Court has said that government entities have a right to speak for themselves. In fact, it's the very business of government to favor and disfavor points of view, so there may be some First Amendment issue. And again, they're just looking to gauge interest in being a named plaintiff or not necessarily looking for any funding.
Commissioners, we got a motion to sue?
I'll make a motion to join.
Okay. We've got a motion from Commissioner Wheeler and a second from Commissioner Solari. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have item D, which is the approval of right-of-way and property exchange along 66th Avenue.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Bill DeBrawl, Deputy County Attorney. Before the Commission today, we have a combination of a purchase of right-of-way and a property exchange. Glenn Besanken owns a 3.36 acre parcel of property in the 6700 block of 66th Avenue. If you take a look at your monitors, you can see the property outlined in yellow. The property contains a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, a 3-car garage shed, none of which will be impacted by the take. The county needs approximately 0.87 acres of property from Mr. Besanken, I'm sorry. Right. Thank you. From Mr. Besanken. And that will bring the right-of-way line. Currently, it is at 184 feet from his house. After the take is finished, the right-of-way line will be 28 feet from his house. That take amounts to be 26% of his property. The property was appraised back in February 2009 and established a land value of $83,200, which is the equivalent of $2.18 per square foot, which is consistent for what we've been paying for property in the area. The improvements were valued at $32,500. Severance damages due to the large 156-foot take and cost to cure combined for $35,000 for a total appraised value at $150,700. Mr. Besanken is represented by Mr. Raymer McGuire of Fixel, McGuire and Willis. They have taken a look at this, the appraisal, and as is customary and required by statute, the county is required to pay the reasonable appraisal fees of $5,500, engineering costs in this matter of $6,400, and an attorney's fee of 5.25% of the purchase price, for a total purchase in this matter of $170,511.75. The purchase price assigns full value to the Murphy Reservation that's present there on the property. During negotiations, Mr. Besanken came to the county and asked if we would be interested in a property exchange along with the sale of the property. Earlier in 2008, in September of 2008, the county purchased the property to the south of the Besanken property. That's outlined in yellow there. That was owned by the Gardners. The Gardners sold at $250,000 for the entire parcel. It was a 1.26 acre parcel. We needed 0.21 acres from the Gardners, and we went ahead and purchased the whole parcel because the right-of-way line that will be taken will come within about 10 feet of the gardener's front door. So instead of going ahead and leaving the right-of-way line 10 feet from the front door, we went ahead and purchased the whole property. Mr. Pasankin is interested in going ahead and securing that property for his own so he can reconfigure his lot and possibly add a second lot there. We used the appraisal from February 2009 to establish a land value at the $2.18 per square foot. So at closing, the county will receive a credit toward the $170,000 figure of approximately $96,000 for the exchange of the property. When we originally purchased the Gardiner property, I think the appraisal came out to be in the neighborhood of $2.27 a square foot. So it's fairly consistent from what we're seeing now. And that appraisal was done in 2006, so the land prices have gone down a little bit. Staff is asking the board to approve the attached contract for the purchase of the property and approve property exchange, whereby we would go ahead and advertise once a week for 2 consecutive weeks in the newspaper and have and bring the matter back for the completion of the property exchange. Are there any questions?
Commissioner?
Move staff's recommendation.
Got a motion to approve staff recommendation, and I'll second that for discussion. Any discussion, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I have some issues with this. And Bill, I think right next to you is a copy of the part of the appraisal, the overhead of do you see right there to your right? You're right.
On the computer? Or
no, a sheet of paper. A sheet of paper.
Sheet of paper. Oh, yeah.
Can you put that on the ELMO, please? My first concern is that the appraisals used here, that the land sales that they use to get comparable values are 2.5 years old. And if you look at the top is the subject property, just to the south of theirs is comparables 3 and 4, which in the appraisal report were identified for selling for about $55,000 an acre. And then at the very bottom, further south from the subject property, are comparables 1 and 2 that were in the $100,000 an acre range. And for whatever reason, the appraiser here decided that the comps 1 and 2 were more similar than comps 3 and 4. So he weighted comps 1 and 2 higher, and that's where he came in with a $100,000 value for per acre for the land, and not giving weight to the comparables 3 and 4, which were much closer and similar in my mind at $55,000 an acre. And then the other real disturbing thing is through this same attorney and through the same appraiser back in February of 2008, the parcel highlighted in red, the Dowling parcel, the county purchased the land, and then the appraisal report came in at $54,794 an acre. So the same appraiser a year ago said that the Dowling parcel is worth $55,000 an acre. There's 2 comparables closer to the subject property at $55,000 an acre, and yet he's using the 2 furthest away comps at $100,000 an acre to justify the land price. So I find that extremely disturbing, the evaluations given for this property. My next concern is the residential sales data was 2 years old, so we're not getting very current pricing, and I think everyone here would agree that in the last 2 years the real estate market has plummeted. I am, again, opposed to the $6,400 of engineering fees. Now, Bill, I stand corrected. I apologize to you, because last time I had made the statement I didn't think we had paid engineering costs in previous ones. And in the Dowling purchase, we did pay engineering fees, so I apologize for that. However, in the Dowling purchase, the engineering fees were only $950. So again, I'm just amazed that this thing is ratcheted up to over $6,000. At $250 an hour, which I think is a pretty liberal fee for an engineer, That's over 25 hours of engineering work. And in the appraisal, all the engineer came up with is he thinks that the new driveways we're going to put in should be increased to 24 feet wide. So, again, totally opposed to paying this engineering fees. You know, I think these guys in Orlando must just be laughing every time one of these comes up and they say, well, what else can we extract from Indian River County? The last thing is, I don't know if anybody's driven out there and looked at this property, but under the cost to cure the severance damages, we're being asked to pay $2,000 for stabilized driveways. They're not stabilized with anything. They're dirt ruts through the grass. Okay, it's not a stabilized driveway. It's dirt ruts through the grass, and we're being asked to pay $2,106 for that. It's ridiculous. And then we're being asked to pay almost $10,000 for the grass. Now, you know, it seems to me when you buy land, whatever's growing on top of it comes with it, and to be said we got to pay $10,000 on top of the $100,000 an acre value that we're paying, and then the you know, a la carte, okay, this blade of grass and this, you know, this is ridiculous. $10,000 for the grass that's on top of the land, I just find astounding. And then lastly, this land swap, in the contract, we are guaranteeing here that the property owner will be allowed to split this lot and create a second buildable lot, which would be an unconforming use. Do we have the authority to do that? Is it within our LDRs that we can just say, yeah, go ahead and create these unconforming buildable lots? And then finally, we're supposed to lease back the Gardenier property, but we already have a lease with the Gardeniers for them. So how can we lease something, or the seller's going to lease it to us, and we're already leasing it to the Gardeniers, and I'm not sure how all that works either. But, you know, these things are just getting out of hand. The engineering costs are ridiculous, paying $10,000 for grass when we already are buying the land. These comparables you see up there, I don't know why we're paying $100,000 an acre when everything nearest this property is $55,000 an acre. And, you know, I think we just need to take a minute and stop all these things and then come up with a plan of how we're going to handle these, because I don't see anybody looking out for the taxpayer dollars here. When we're being asked to pay $2,000 for a dirt rut and $10,000 for grass on top of the $100,000 an acre, I'm just boggled that we're doing this. I just cannot see this. So I'm totally opposed to this purchase.
Okay, thank you. Mr. DeBraw?
Thank you. First of all, as far as the comparables in the Dowling property, the Dowling property was not similar. There were no severance damages involved in that take. So when you're bringing the doorstep 156 foot closer to the right-of-way line, it does set yourself up for severance damages.
But Bill, the severance damages are separate from the land valuation and the appraisal. Okay.
Well, Commissioner, he was just talking about the severance damages right now.
Right, but that's unrelated to the $55,000 an acre we pay for the Dowling parcel. That was strictly the land value. In the subject one we're looking at, the land value is $100,000 an acre, irregardless of severance. That's a whole separate thing. So
you want to address the land value?
I believe the Dowling parcel was much larger in size as well, where here we're dealing with smaller acreages and a different configuration.
No, it was 0.73 acres that we bought from the Dowlings for $40,000.
What was the parcel size of the parent parcel from Dowling?
That wasn't in your report. It says we're buying 0.73.
Okay. I mean, I didn't anticipate any questions about Dowling beforehand, but I'd be happy to go back and take a look at what the entire Dowling parcel was.
I believe it's at least a 5-acre parcel.
I think it is substantially larger than the ones under discussion here. And I do not believe there are any houses or structures on the Dowling parcel either. I think it is just unimproved raw bare land. As far as the appraisal is concerned, I had a conversation with Mr. Bob Babcock. He's an MAI, a certified appraiser. I spoke with him yesterday, and he watched the previous commission meeting, and he took interest in your PowerPoint presentation that you made the last time, and he has offered to come down here and either do a workshop with you or just make a presentation to you of what an appraiser looks at. They're all supposed to follow along by the same rules, use the same guidelines in arriving at their appraisal opinion, and it is an opinion. So if you want to take him up on his offer there, he'd be more than happy to come down from Orlando. And again, Commissioner O'Brien, I have worked with the people that have been involved in these matters for almost 2 years now, and I do not get the feeling that we are being gouged in this matter. I don't think anybody's doing anything unethical or unprofessional in dealing with the county. I know your feelings differ on that matter, but again, if you would like the folks to come down and make a presentation to you to see what they look at from the other side of the table, they have offered to do so. So that might be something that the commission...
I'd love to have him come and tell me how a dirt rut is worth $2,000. Absolutely. And I want him to tell me why he ignored these more closer comparables and used the more expensive ones. And again, in his appraisal, he broke out the land value and then he broke out the residence value. So he used two different techniques. And again, I go back to the Dowling parcel. If it was for the land, these four comps are all land-only comparisons. Okay, none of them have houses on them because he had separate comparables for the residential value. So these were all raw land comparables. So again, I want to know why we're paying $100,000 an acre instead of the 55. And I also want to know why when you buy, and in these comparables, I'd like to know, did anybody pay extra for the grass that was on these land purchases? Because he's asking us to pay $10,000 for the grass. So I want to know, did he factor that in when he looked at these comparables? So yeah, I want him to come down.
And you'll have your opportunity to ask him those questions. Addressing the other point as far as the lots, whether or not they can be split. We had a conversation when we went ahead with this with Mr. Bowling, Planning Department Chief. If you take a look at the screen, you'll see that there are two lots there. Each of them are less than 5 acres.
Bill, you need to switch over to the PMO still on.
You can see that each of them are less than 5 acres. Each are currently a non-conforming use. Code says that you cannot expand on a non-conforming use. So what Mr. Besanken is going to do is he's going to join those two lots and making a larger lot and then split it into 2 lots of equal size, therefore expanding a non-conforming use as far as the lot that he's acquiring, and also expanding the non-conforming use that he will have left with his lot. That's been approved by Planning Department already.
You mean contracting the one that he has on his lot, but expanding the ones that he's getting?
Yes.
Okay. They do a lot line readjustment on it. They're still both non-conforming uses.
And they've already surveyed that out.
I'm going to withdraw my motion.
Okay. Got a motion to withdraw. We do not have a motion, Commissioner. What's your pleasure?
Move to deny the purchase.
Got a motion to deny the purchase on the Besanken property.
Second.
A second by Commissioner Solari. And yes.
I would ask that the commission give me some direction in the form of specific direction. And my reasoning is thus. If during the negotiations, as you have participated in them before, it is not fruitful negotiations if you just come with an offer and you are told no. You are put in the position of bargaining against yourself. I would like to see something come back so that there is a counteroffer.
I would like to, and I know what Bill's saying, and I agree. We've gone through this, and we wanted to bring it to a point where when it got here, we had but Commissioner O'Brien has really taken an interest and done a lot of work on this. I don't know how we would do it, and I don't know if Commissioner O'Brien would want to do it, but I'd almost like to see Commissioner O'Brien be a liaison or something where he's involved in some of this because of the work and the interest and background he's done, and it may eliminate some of this momentary decisions when we get in front of the commission. We've done that with other projects, and I think it would be beneficial. And I know his background is in finance. He's a scientist, and I think that his approach is very logical.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'd like to, Chris Morris here. Chris, can you come down and answer a question for me? I have some concern, especially after Commissioner Wheel's comments. The last evaluation that we looked at appraisal, we were comparing replacing lanterns, replacing lighting, electrical lines, lamp posts, and fixtures with a picture from one of the home improvement stores of a $49.99 light or a $79.99 light. It was almost insultuous to the decision-making process as well as to the landowner and everything that we stood for. Of course, you can tear apart what we're calling a stabilized roadway. I don't think that that's trade puffery. I don't think that's fluff. I think that there's some value to a stabilized roadway and access to a driveway to a piece of property. I don't think that this is fluff. I don't think that these are exaggerated prices. I don't necessarily agree with the evaluation, but some of these aspersions are way off base. And I just wanted to point out that and ask Mr. Mora, what constitutes a stabilized driveway, and what do you think the average 18-foot stabilized driveway would comprise of, and about dollar-wise, where would we stand with replacing a stabilized driveway?
Chris Moore, Assistant Public Works Director. Typically, a driveway that's been stabilized has had some rock or material placed. It's been excavated down a foot or so and then had some rock or stabilized material added so that when it rains, when there's adverse environmental conditions, it doesn't just fall apart and go away, and vehicles can travel on it without distorting it or making it untravelable. But I think you're talking about the total amount of rock and material and labor probably under $1,000.
Would there be a culvert involved in a stabilized driveway?
There can be if there's a swale running along or a ditch running along the road. That can require a culvert put in which case that would drive the cost up because you have to
about how much?
Pipe. Probably under, if there's a 18, 24-inch pipe involved, you're probably still talking under $5,000 for the whole.
So $2,000 would not be considered an inflated price, an off-the-wall price
Well,
to replace?
I think in this case we weren't talking about a stabilized driveway, though.
I thought I heard that's how we heard it.
What they call it.
The appraisal has it in there as a stabilized driveway. I drove and looked at the property, and it's basically a rut driven through the grass. If you go to your yard, you drive your truck back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and create a rut, that's what's on this property. It's not stabilized. There's nothing added to it. The gates we're paying for I couldn't find because they were covered in the weeds. But, if you went up there and looked at this, you'd see it's not a stabilized driveway. We're being asked to pay for.
Never mind. Well, let me ask. I think I like the fact, I really do like the fact that Commissioner O'Brien has taken an interest. He's gone out, he's gone to these properties. I don't know, Bill, have you ever gone to these properties or just paperwork in the office when they come in?
It depends. I've visited some. I don't think I've visited this one specifically. I'm familiar with it. I mean, I'm
not trying to put you in a bad situation. I'm just saying that Commissioner O'Brien has gone on not just this property, but some other ones, and I think he's made some very, very good points. I'd like to get through this, and my position has been, when we have to take property from people, the price is going up, and I know that, and I don't like eminent domain to begin with. But, and I think that it costs more when you're buying something people don't want. But I would like to see some of these questions answered, and I would like to see maybe, even in advance of it coming in front of this commissioner, and not just the backup material, that Commissioner O'Brien, if he available himself to be available for some of these things, so he's in on the ground floor and looks at the whole thing, and see if we can.
Well, the way to, in my opinion, the way to handle this is if Commissioner O'Brien has this kind of heartburn with it, he should have gotten with staff prior to this to ask these questions. And then, because it's not an issue of doing his homework, he's done his homework. It's more of how, in my opinion, how you address these concerns. I'm not saying he's right or wrong.
But Chairman, that doesn't address the underlying problem, because the offer's essentially established by the time Commissioner O'Brien gets the materials.
I understand what you're saying, but Commissioner O'Brien he doesn't have a problem with the offer, it seems like. It's how they established and came up with the values of the offer he's really having heartburn.
No, he has a problem with the offer, because the offer includes things that we shouldn't be paying for.
Well, if y'all want to get involved in the direct negotiations, I call it micromanagement and disagree with you. So I don't think that's what you're wanting to do, and the way to handle this is to get with staff and try to figure out exactly how they came up with this, and then if it is that's the way to handle it. And I appreciate everybody's homework in this, but the homework, sir.
That's what
I don't call it. I don't know what you want to call it, but we've done this before. In fact, this board appointed Commissioner Fletcher to serve over in the what's the acronym for it?
The Interlocal Service Boundary Agreement.
Yeah. So we're not setting a precedent.
No.
Secondly, even if Mr. O'Brien looked at the backup material, as Mr. Solari, I think, was going in that direction, and went down and talked with staff about it, it wouldn't change a thing at this meeting, because staff's not going to change it based on his conversation with him privately, and he's still going to come here. And I haven't seen the two of them agree on their disagreements yet. So I haven't seen either of them saying, no, you're right, I'm wrong. And I think that Mr. O'Brien should be more involved in what we're doing. And I don't call it micromanagement. He's one commissioner. We have liaisons on many, many boards and many, many different things, and it gives him insight, and he's the only one that's taken this specific an interest in this.
Well, and all I got to say to that is I really do appreciate the flair and the passion and, quite honestly, some of the temper that's brought out from Commissioner O'Brien at these meetings. I enjoy the dialogue and debate. I don't want that in negotiations.
No, and I think that it makes the amount of effort that he's put into this has made for a good decision on his part, and a good vote and a robust vote. Unfortunately, I think we're compromising the ability for staff to collect the data, the ability for these trained professionals to do their evaluations, and then interfere with the attorney's capacity to be able to negotiate. And I believe that this is a downward spiral, and we're convoluting the issue, and we'll probably be working on these roadway projects for another 10 to 15 years, just based on those facts alone.
Now, there's a way from Commissioner O'Brien to get the answers to this, and then whenever he gets the answers, he asked questions and disputed the conclusions. And to still have the answers whenever he comes here, I think, is really where I'd like to see it addressed. Now, you still dispute the conclusions after you get the answers, but you don't see how the driveway would cost this. You know, to see those figures and to back that up, I think is totally appropriate, and for him to get those answers well in advance of the meeting.
Right.
You know, Mr. Chairman,
up how much that driveway could cost, though.
Well, that's just one of the many issues.
One minor
but I'm talking about, like the last time, he brought up some legitimate things that I thought that, I mean, Commissioner.
I just think it's funny that prior to this, we spent 45 minutes discussing how we want the authority to make exceptions to staff recommendations, and now we're arguing, no, we don't want to make any exceptions to staff recommendations. I find it pretty hilarious, frankly.
Where do you find that? I missed that point.
Commissioner Fletcher said we should letter in staff.
No, what they're asking is for exceptions to staff's recommendation of the approval. He's asking for you to please make a recommendation to go back to the negotiations, and I don't see your point.
It's the point of Mr. Fletcher was saying that we shouldn't be dealing with staff.
You know,
let me just wrap this up. I'll amend my motion, Bill, so you can go forward. I would move that we purchase the right-of-way needed based upon a land value of $55,000. We will pay engineering fees of $1,000, and we will not pay any compensation for the driveways or grass. And all the other terms of the agreement will hold.
Might as well just tell them no.
I'll second that.
All right, we've got a motion to pay $1,000 worth of engineering fees, $55,000 for the land value per acre, and then all the other terms and conditions will be in place.
And no payment for the driveway or the grass.
That's okay. Okay. That's what.
And then the attorney's fee will be based upon the percentage of the revised.
But not including the engine. You don't want that on the engineering fees again, do you?
No.
Okay.
It never is.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yes, Commissioner. Yes.
Thanks for recognizing me, Commissioner. Just a suggestion on this. I think this is an ongoing problem and has been in the past, and I handle a lot of the right-of-ways on different locations. So my suggestion would be this, if it would be okay with y'all. How about when the appraiser sends the appraisal in, that part of our specifications of what he provides is that he attends the meeting to answer these questions, and we can ask him how he came up with these numbers and these answers. Because some of the questions might come up after the fact. And, Commissioner O'Brien wouldn't have the ability to have those questions ahead of time. So why couldn't he appear at a meeting and defend his position on how he arrived at these different numbers? And then that would, instead of Bill trying to guess what he said, and instead of us arguing about it.
Well, I would prefer that try to be handled over a phone call. And I know that you're not going to know every question to every answer in advance, right, or be able to ask every question in advance. But to be able to pay somebody from Orlando to come over here and sit when we're paying the bill for that, that's kind of going in the opposite direction of what Commissioner O'Brien's trying to do here, which is be prudent with some dollars.
Well, it doesn't sound like with the numbers that Commissioner O'Brien's questioning, somebody making a trip over here from Orlando, one of those numbers would be just a fraction of what Commissioner O'Brien's trying to bring forward. And that would just be part of the bid. Maybe that would go back to the commissioner. We have appraisers here that are MIA appraisers. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the competition. That's part of the bid. Buy local type deal, the whole thing. Well, that's just part of the bid. If we want to use somebody from Orlando, then he has to drive from Orlando and compete with the guy down the street. What's wrong with that? But if he's here to answer the questions, he's a professional. He can say, here's how I arrived at. Here's where I got the numbers. Here's who gave me the numbers. Here's why it is.
The problem with that is at the very end of it, and they say, but this is just my opinion.
So they need to buy the
and that's all an appraisal is, and that's how they get out of. So I don't know.
I think the question should be asked. I think it's a good idea.
Thank you,
Commissioners. Maybe we should create a negotiations committee. I don't like committees that where there's someone from the attorney's office looks at before it comes to you. What happens is maybe have Mike, who handles it, and an engineer, and maybe a commissioner, and we all look at it. It'll slow it up, but at least we'll have all the questions answered when we get here.
I would support that. I'd put Commissioner O'Brien on as a liaison.
It's okay with you?
It's good with me.
Fine with me.
I'll make that a motion.
All right, hold on. We've got a motion on the floor here for the 55. And I don't need to repeat it, do I, Mr. Collins? You got it down? Okay. All right, Commissioner O'Brien's counteroffer, but if there's no discussion, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have to appoint what was that committee again?
Negotiation We'll make another committee.
And, okay, a committee, negotiating committee for right-of-way.
And Mr. O'Brien would be
Commissioner O'Brien
liaison, and we probably should name who's on it.
I have Mike Zito handling all of our side, and Bill DeBrawl and maybe one member of the engineering team.
That's fine with me.
Okay. We have that. All those in favor, is there any discussion?
Yes. As far as my first question, is this every single right-of-way parcel?
Well, I'm not in favor of it, so I'm...
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. If we go for a corner clip where it might be $750...
Well, you negotiate every single parcel. What's wrong with having Mr. O'Brien in there so these questions can be answered?
I don't see why we can't just bring it back before this commission.
Let's go ahead and wrap this up to a vote.
Bill, I think we'll just use common sense on it.
Need another committee.
I like common sense.
I'm glad y'all like common sense. Let's move forward. I think
common sense is good when everybody thinks it.
All right. We've got a motion for the committee, and we've just established who's going to be in it, and they're going to use common sense on whether or not they use it.
Who made the motion?
The motion was made by Commissioner Wheeler and seconded by Commissioner Solari. No further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
Nay.
Motion passes 3 to 2 with Commissioner Davis and Commissioner Flesher dissenting. Okay. That moves us to I've got a controversial issue here.
Move approval.
Yeah. All right, I've got
there you go, vote without even knowing what's going on.
Move to approve. Seconded. I'll second that. All those in favor of the
which one?
The Paul's who I'm recommended. Paul.
Only if you can say the last name, Mr. Chairman.
Somebody didn't use common sense when they spelled that one.
Hey. Wow.
This gentleman, just his background, though, he had some an interest in the Vero Beach's historic resources and has decided to. Paul, help me with your last name.
My last name is Kovshenikov.
That's the way I would have pronounced it.
That's exactly right. I didn't have the common sense to say it right, so forgive me there, Paul. But Paul,
this is what I should say. I should say for the record.
For the record, there you go.
My address is at 2050 East Lakeview Drive, Sebastian, Florida. I currently serve for the City of Vero Beach Historic Preservation Commission, and I ask for your acceptance of me to start to serve for the county as well as the city level. The reason is so we can both unilaterally protect and also enhance the resources and also the natural and cultural heritage of our wonderful county of Indian River. As we travel around, and we have traveled different parts of the country and different counties, we see that there is a uniqueness within Indian River County, not only with the administration having such a wonderful job and your duties that you serve, and I thank you for that. But we also see that we have a history here. It's a small town atmosphere with amazing, wonderful qualities that we want to maintain. And by maintaining it, I brought my son here earlier. His name is Jonathan, sitting in the back. And what is history? History is actually passing down from one generation to the other. And that's why I brought him here. So I can pass our history. Your history, our history, for his history, for his future of his son's children.
Thank you very much, and you see the passion, the reason why I recommended him. Thank you. Okay, we've got a motion from Commissioner Wheeler. I second it, and no discussion. We'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion passes unanimously. And Commissioners, if I'm not mistaken, I now declare this meeting adjourned.